Blood was flowing out of his entire body, and half of his arm was already twisted out of shape, making him look like a cripple. Many parts of his face were deformed, and his breathing was getting weaker and weaker. What terrifying combat strength! With the addition of his battle will and the deepening of his understanding of his cultivation method at the last moment, his battle prowess has directly broken through the shackles of 250 times. Even among the Emperor of Slaughter, very few people can achieve such a level of slaughter. Monster! Monster! This is a monster! The entire scene was silent. Looking at Lu Feng, who was slowly descending from the sky with blood flowing all over his body, a feeling of reverence rose in their hearts. Finally, Lu Feng stood on the ground. He looked at the Abyss Wolf, whose breathing was already extremely weak, and his eyes were filled with the majesty of a supreme emperor. The bloodline of the human monarch has never withered. If there is anything that can surpass the human monarch, then it can only be the new monarch. And I, Lu Feng, am the new monarch. At this moment I am the titled monarch. Do you all agree? Lu Feng's words reverberated, making everyone feel a boundless domineering aura. Arrogance, this was truly boundless arrogance. This was simply boundless arrogance. What kind of existence was the human monarch? It was an invincible existence that had already reached the pinnacle of legends. For example, the first divine king, the netherworld heavenly venerate, the strongest divine king, who had walked into the divine king's third realm, had their reputations completely suppressed by the human monarch. In this era, there were billions of experts in the universe, but there was only one human monarch. Now, Lu Feng actually said that he was the new monarch. He was the monarch, and he wanted to surpass the human monarch. Even though his current performance was abnormally terrifying, there was still no one who agreed with this statement. In everyone's eyes, Lu Feng was like a clown. However, Lu Feng turned a blind eye to these people. At this very moment, when he entered the battle intent, Lu Feng finally felt that kind of nobility. It was a nobility that surpassed everything. It was a kind of great monarch existence that the entire universe had to submit to and billions of gods had to bow down to. In this realm, he was the eternal monarch. Although he had the bloodline of the human monarch, in Lu Feng's heart, the human monarch was also an expert and an invincible existence that had cultivated to become a living being. He was born the noblest, and he was supreme. Then, he would surpass everything. Above his monarch head, even the heavens couldn't cover it. Even the Tao couldn't be at the same level. Lu Feng swept his gaze and looked in one direction. There stood 5 existences quietly. They were also at the advanced warrior realm, but they exuded a kind of supreme aura. They were all young paragons, recognized by the universe as young paragons. They were the 5 emperors of massacre left behind in the massacre abyss. With a light step, Lu Feng stepped over the dying Abyss Wolf and stepped on the void to arrive at the center of the arena. What a terrifying comprehension ability! The battle earlier actually allowed him to deepen his comprehension of the realm a step further. He's not even at the warrior realm, but he can actually walk on air. No. He's not walking on air. He's walking on air. How terrifying, really terrifying! The gods of massacre exclaimed, unable to describe the agitation in their hearts at this moment. Finally, Lu Fenglai arrived in front of the 5 emperors of massacre, who were at the advanced warrior realm. He looked at the strangely profound people in front of him and revealed a cold smile. Are you all willing to submit to me and respect me as Emperor? To become the Emperor of Massacre, one had to battle with the god of massacre and display a sufficiently powerful realm during the battle. Then, one would be recognized by the Emperor of Massacre of this realm and finally become the Emperor of Massacre. Normally, there would be 5 to 7 battles. The most important thing to become the Emperor of Massacre was to gain the recognition of the Emperors of Massacre. However, these 5 battles also couldn't be lost. The Emperor of Massacre was a young paragon. If one lost to the god of massacre, then what kind of paragon was he? What qualifications did he have to become the emperor of massacre? Lu Feng had only defeated one god of massacre, although the Abyss Wolf was ranked second among all the gods of massacre. However, everyone believed that if Lu Feng hadn't entered the battle intent at the crucial moment, it would have been difficult for him to win. The fact that Luo Yunyang had actually said such a thing made everyone speechless. A foreign emperor of massacre glanced at Lu Feng. Finally, a faint expression appeared on his face. This was mockery. Endless mockery. I originally thought that someone with the human monarch bloodline would be an exceptional powerhouse. However, it seems like I was wrong. What kind of arrogant person is this? What right do you have to make me recognize you? The other 4 emperors of massacre nodded their heads gently. Their expressions were the same. If Lu Feng had entered the battle intent and destroyed the Abyss Wolf, these people would have reluctantly acknowledged Lu Feng's identity as the Emperor of Massacre. But of all things, Lu Feng shouldn't have actually said that kind of thing. Although Lu Feng had the bloodline of the human monarch, and this was considered a matter of the Lu family, the human monarch was no longer the ancestor of the Lu family. He had already become a synonym for this era of civilization. He was the greatest and most invincible symbol. Lu Feng's words had already provoked the dignity of all powerhouses. If Lu Feng's desire to surpass the human monarch had made them feel uncomfortable, then Lu Feng's unparalleled strength had infuriated the 5 emperors of massacre. Thus, they no longer cared about the Lu family's status as a direct descendant. They no longer cared about the Lu family's patriarch hidden in the void. Lu Feng, you think too much. Although your strength is not bad and you have barely entered the realm of the Emperor of Massacre, your heart is really arrogant. What right do you have to be called a young paragon? What right do you have to make us recognize you? The underworld race's Emperor of Massacre didn't ridicule Lu Feng excessively. Instead, he spoke his mind. At the moment, everyone was silent. The people gathered here were all descendants of true aristocrats. The total number of emperors of massacre of the 4 major grades added up to more than 20 people. Besides them, there were also exceptional powerhouses who had awakened and were hidden in the void, watching everything unfold. It could be said that Lu Feng would have no problem becoming an emperor of massacre this time. But what he said just now put himself in an extreme position, making his hopes slim. Everyone was looking at Lu Feng, waiting for his reply. The Lu family's patriarch, who was hidden in the void, frowned. He had never met Lu Feng before, but he had heard about Lu Feng from his family. Thus, he could be considered to have understood Lu Feng. However, the Lu Feng he knew and the Lu Feng before him were 2 completely different people. Although your aptitude is the highest in the history of the Lu family and you are the closest to the primogenitor human monarch, you are still very weak. Lu Feng, you are really too insolent this time. You are still only close. My primogenitor human monarch strength is not something you can understand. The Lu family's patriarch sighed deeply. As a descendant of the primogenitor human monarch, he was well aware of his strength. However, Lu Feng, who hadn't grown up in the Lu family, didn't know this. This was probably the main reason why Lu Feng had said such a thing. This time, powerhouses from every race are watching. I'm afraid that the Lu family is going to be humiliated this time. Forget it, forget it. You are still young after all. Let's end it this time. Finally, the Lu family's patriarch decided to appear and end this farce. If this continued, who knew what kind of heaven-shaking words Lu Feng would have? Only the Lu family would be humiliated like that. However, just as the Lu family's patriarch was about to appear, an immense might descended. It was a terrifying aura that surpassed any imagination. It was indescribable and horrifying. At that moment, the entire massacre star trembled, as if it was in danger of collapsing at any moment. Many existences were horrified and looked at the horizon in disbelief. The same was true for the Almighties who had been hiding. They were familiar with this aura, as they had felt it many times before. They had originally thought that he wouldn't return after leaving. However, no one had expected that he would actually return. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Xiao Feng, well done. The primogenitor human monarch has already lost his composure in the past. We are the ones in charge in this generation. Even if he is the primogenitor of the Lu family, why can't we surpass him? My son, I believe in you. Chapter 202. A figure slowly descended from the void. It was an endless and wide crack. The figure slowly walked out of the crack and landed on the massacre star. Insolence, endless insolence. Overbearing, frighteningly overbearing. It's him. It's actually him. He's back from 30 years ago. At this moment, almost everyone in the field recognized the figure. In the massacre star, his existence was too powerful. He was the true idol of the younger generation. There were very few who didn't recognize him. Back then, he killed until time and space trembled, and until time lost its light. He used killing and blood to forge his eternal glory. The Massacre King. He obtained the title of Massacre King in the past 800 years. He's the supreme of the younger generation and has the potential to become the divine king. Actually, the title of Massacre King is the most suitable for him. He's the one who deserves it. During the gathering of the myriad clans, he slaughtered the younger generation of a myriad of clans by himself, and he used the blood of countless gods to establish his inextinguishable reputation. Godslayer Lu Tao. At this moment, when Lu Feng was being questioned by billions of people, Lu Feng's father, the great supreme, Godslayer Lu Tao, descended. You're actually the son of Godslayer. The human king, after all, was only a legend that had already become a myth. Not to mention the younger generation, even those of the older generation rarely knew of the terror of the human king. However, Lu Tao they all clearly understood. It could be said that among the billions of races in the universe, there were very few geniuses of the younger generation who didn't know about Lu Tao. This was the fame forged by blood and killing. It was the unparalleled immortality of one person and one punch. Countless people regarded Lu Tao as their idol and followed the trail of Lu Tao. However, only now did they know that the bloodline of the Lu family in front of them, the boundlessly arrogant young man, was actually the bloodline of Godslayer. This was hard to believe. His Majesty Godslayer, if it was you who said those words, then perhaps we could reluctantly believe it. But for your child, I simply cannot believe it. You are known as the most talented person in the universe in the past 500 years. Your strength has been witnessed by many. Many existences have said that you are the most likely existence to reach the level of the universe's strongest divine king, but that is only you. I can't believe that your son has such qualifications. An emperor of massacre spoke up. Even though his tone was one of worship, his words were filled with doubt. Although Lu Tao was their idol, any genius would believe that they were the strongest, let alone these peerless monsters. They believed in Lu Tao's invincibility, but they didn't believe in Lu Feng's strength. Hearing this, everyone looked up at the sky, at the incomparably domineering and imposing figure. Lu Tao didn't answer. He didn't even look at him. He just turned around and looked at the terrifying spatial crack that hadn't closed yet. Suddenly, he smiled faintly and said, "Dear, someone is suspecting our son." The moment his voice fell, an equally terrifying aura that made the massacre star tremble once again spread. Slowly, a figure walked out of the spatial crack. That kind of untainted beauty, that kind of peerlessly enchanting beauty. That extremely beautiful face was intoxicating, and the aura of a banished immortal made people revere it. When they saw this figure, countless people took a deep breath. The way they looked at Lu Feng changed once again. Many people had already recognized who that figure was. The peerless emperor of massacre 30 years ago, Emperor Wei. The person who had descended was Yan Chunwei, Lu Tao's wife and Lu Feng's mother, the husband and wife pair, one king and one emperor, shocked the world. Both of them had the most precious bloodlines, and Lu Feng was the fusion of their bloodlines. This was hard to believe. Looking at the two people in the sky, Lu Feng's cold eyes showed a hint of warmth for the first time. The corners of his mouth curved into a perfect smile. Dad, Mom, when they heard Lu Feng's call, Lu Tao and Yan Chenwei's eyes showed a doting look. However, in the next moment, Yan Chenwei's expression changed. It was a kind of coldness that was exactly the same as Lu Feng's. Her voice was so beautiful that it left one lingering in the aftertaste of her voice. However, the words that came out of her mouth were horrifying. Hubby, since there are people who are not convinced, then let's use your method to convince them, the method to kill a god? Everyone was slightly taken aback. However, in the next moment, their expressions changed drastically. There was only one way to kill a god, and that was to kill. Endless and boundless killing. Killing a god was an existence with unparalleled combat strength. Now that he had stepped into the celestial god realm, it was likely that only the hidden forces of the major clans could contend against such an invincible existence. However, at the instant when Lu Tao took a step forward and descended onto the battlefield, a voice stopped them. Dad, Mom, I can do it myself. The one who spoke was Lu Feng. At this moment, Lu Feng was no longer looking at the sky. He was only looking at the 5 high-level warrior-level emperors of Massacre in front of him. Lu Feng's pride did not need help from others, even if those people were his parents. Looking at Lu Feng, Lu Tao, and Yan Chenwei all showed strange expressions. They had never seen Lu Feng like this. The two of them had watched Lu Feng grow up, and it could be said that they were incomparably familiar with Lu Feng. However, at this moment Lu Feng made them feel like he was a stranger. Once again, everyone's eyes were focused on Lu Feng. At this moment, he was truly the focus of everyone's attention. Lu Feng saw that their expressions had changed. Finally, he spoke slowly. Just now you misheard me. I didn't want you to acknowledge me. This time, I want to be conferred the title of a new emperor. My title is the Emperor. What I want is for you to submit. Everyone was stunned. Everyone thought that Lu Feng was going to admit defeat. He wanted to use the name of his parents to make these people acknowledge his identity as the Emperor of Massacre. However, at this moment, when Lu Feng said it again, everyone couldn't help but be stunned again. Submit? He was asking the 5 emperors of Slaughter to submit to him. Was Lu Feng stupid? This was the only thought in everyone's mind. However, unlike these people, the 5 emperors of Massacre, who had faced Lu Feng directly, didn't think so. At this moment, countless drops of cold sweat flowed down their cheek. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. As existences who had faced Lu Feng directly, their feelings couldn't be understood by anyone. At this moment, Lu Feng seemed to have changed into a different person. He was no longer the Lu Feng from before. Endless nobility and the mighty will of an emperor kept invading their hearts, making them feel the urge to submit completely. Lu Feng didn't say anything as he watched the constantly changing expressions of the 5 people. However, his heart was filled with a strange feeling. When he had entered the battle-will state and completely condensed his, I am the Emperor, Lu Feng felt that he had changed. Or perhaps, the current him was the real him. He should have been an incomparably noble and mighty existence in the first place. The appearance of the sky-piercing Fudu had made Lu Feng feel that he had already started to change slowly. The awakening of the invincible bloodline and countless powerful advancements had made his heart gradually transform. However, Lu Feng understood that regardless of whether it was the crazy Lu Feng or the sharp-edged Lu Feng, they weren't him. The real him had never appeared. All the craziness, sharpness, humility, and serenity had only been his appearance. Lu Feng had been at a loss. He had realized that he couldn't find the real him. However, when he had stepped into Dao Songtian's inner world and entered the Dao at a young age, Lu Feng had gradually found himself. Gradually, he had seen the real him from the mystery. Although it had only been a moment, Lu Feng had also seen the first time his mind had materialized. He saw the vision of everything. Dao Songtian didn't know any of this. No one knew that at that moment, Lu Feng was actually clear-headed, standing at the top of the universe, looking down on billions of living beings. Billions of gods as his body, countless immortals and demons as his bones, the truth of time and space as his eyes, and fate as his soul. This was the true face of Lu Feng. He didn't know what he was hiding. However, at that moment, Lu Feng clearly knew that he should have been like that. He should be the greatest starting point of everything since ancient times, the ultimate end of everything. Therefore, from that moment on, Lu Feng had awakened. Back then, when Lu Feng had suspected that everything was just an illusion, he had collided with those eternal wills during the God of Massacre's test. He had crushed them and completely suppressed them. The nobility in the depths of his life and the majesty of an emperor had allowed him to stand up again. It had made him understand that he was the greatest nobility that not even fate could dictate. From that moment on, Lu Feng had finally found the real him. That should be him as an emperor. Perhaps it wasn't so obvious during normal times, but the moment the battle began, everything that Lu Feng had hidden was finally completely awakened. That was the reason why all those words were spoken. That was the reason why the 5 great massacre emperors were willing to submit to him. Gradually, many people began to feel the strangeness of the situation. They looked at the 5 emperors of slaughter, whose faces were constantly contorted, and revealed strange expressions. Finally, it seemed that they could no longer bear such an atmosphere. A foreign race's emperor of massacre erupted. An aura that could shake everything rose from the ground, crushing the wind and clouds and suppressing the earth. Lu Feng, I am the Emperor of Massacre, I am the greatest and peerless of all time. Even the King of Massacre can't make me submit. You, an existence who hasn't even become the Emperor of Massacre, what qualifications do you have to make me submit? You can't. You can't. Even your father, the legendary great god of massacre, who was recognized as the universe's #1 talent in the past 500 years, is only qualified to be our idol. He can't possibly make us submit and revere him as an emperor. As the first slaughtering emperor went berserk, the remaining 4 slaughtering emperors also went berserk. Their auras continued to rise. When they reached the peak, each of their auras had already surpassed Lu Feng and Yuan Lang's when they were fighting against each other. This is the true Emperor of Massacre. He is the Emperor of Massacre who has experienced endless battles. This Lu Feng wants to use his parents' authority to force them to submit to him. This is absolutely impossible. Every Emperor of Massacre has their own dignity. How can they submit to someone else? I'd like to see how the son of the god of massacre will end this time. Outside the void, a few ancient almighties were communicating through their minds. Their strength was terrifying. Although they were no longer Lu Tao's match, the gap between them was very small. They didn't like Lu Tao very much. Therefore, these ancient almighties were more than happy to see Lu Tao's son humiliate himself. All the attention, including the Almighty's divine consciousness, was focused on Lu Feng. It could be said that Lu Feng looked really ugly at this moment. In everyone's opinion, Lu Feng intended to use his parents' prestige to oppress others. Unfortunately, his way of thinking was too simple, and his way of doing things was too arrogant. If he had used the power of Lu Tao's arrival, perhaps a few people would have taken a step forward and acknowledged Lu Feng's position as emperor. However, now that Lu Feng had said that he would submit, everything could no longer be undone. Chapter 203. Ignorant, how ignorant! Does he think he can make the Emperor of Massacre submit by borrowing the power of his parents? He's too naive. This time, it's not just the Lu family who will be embarrassed. I'm afraid even Emperor Slayer and Emperor Wei will be embarrassed together. It wasn't just one expert who was discussing. The voices gradually gathered and grew louder. They weren't too afraid of God Slayer. After all, this was the massacre abyss. Moreover, they were all from powerful clans and forces. As long as they didn't provoke God Slayer too much, they weren't afraid of him. The discussions below could no longer be suppressed. At this moment, Emperor Wei's cold snort reverberated throughout the area, causing the voices to vanish instantly. Yan Chenwei's expression became even colder. Those who were familiar with her knew that this was a sign that this beautiful Emperor of Massacre was about to unleash her wrath. Wife, it's not worth it to be angry with them. Our son is not someone that these people can judge or criticize. They will see the true face of Xiaofeng. In this world, if there was anyone who truly knew how terrifying Lu Feng was, it would be Lu Tao. He was definitely the first. He knew that Lu Feng's trump card wasn't just the power of the human king's bloodline. Previously, when he faced the will of the divine king of the netherworld, the great ancient demon that he awakened was absolutely terrifying. That kind of power was actually comparable to the power of the human king's bloodline. Although he didn't know how Lu Feng got it, Lu Tao knew that once Lu Feng really used the power of the great demon, no one in the realm of the Emperor of Massacre would be a match for him. After this, I'll let Xiaofeng go into seclusion and cultivate properly in the family. Once he truly masters the scripture of the human king, then surpassing me in the past will be a cinch. Everyone looked at Lu Feng with ridicule. They wanted to see how he was going to deal with this. However, in the face of these ridicule and doubts, Lu Feng only smiled. It was a cold, murderous smile. It was a smile that made people tremble with just one look. The majesty of the king. No provocation, no blasphemy. Since you aren't willing to submit, the only thing I can do is to suppress you. Suppress? Someone who was barely on the verge of becoming the Emperor of Massacre actually said that he wanted to suppress him. Trying to suppress the 5 true Emperors of Slaughter? What a joke! What a joke! However, just as everyone wanted to laugh, the smiles on their faces suddenly froze. That was because at this moment, Lu Feng had once again begun to improve endlessly. His bloodline power. Just how rich is this bloodline power? Just now, it wasn't the power of his bloodline that was completely boiling. Even when his father killed the king, he could barely reach this level of strength. At that time, King Slayer was already a warrior at the peak of the perfect stage. Could it be that this Lu Feng's bloodline is so dense that his father is going to kill the king? Strong and majestic. The illusory figure of the human king behind Lu Feng actually became more and more intense, as if it was going to descend at any time. At this moment, a kind of terrifying majesty slowly transmitted from that illusory figure. It actually started to affect all operations. When the bloodline reached a certain level of density, it could borrow the projection of the bloodline's source power across endless time and space. This wasn't a legend. Many evildoers with incomparably dense bloodlines had already proven this point. However, the human king's bloodline could borrow the projection of the human king's power. This had never happened before. The human king was the #1 king since ancient times in this era. He was the most powerful and invincible existence. His bloodline power was the #1 in the universe. The degree of strength was unimaginable. The terrifying degree of amplification was almost equivalent to the terror of a late-stage psyche master. However, it was precisely because of the terror of the human king's bloodline that until now, there had never been a human king of the Lu family who could summon the descent of the human king's will. Even Lu Tao back then couldn't. But now they saw it. Lu Feng, this previously incomparably arrogant existence, actually summoned the descent of the human king's will. At this moment, Lu Feng's power increased again. It was a terrifying increase. The previous him was barely at the edge of the Emperor of Massacre. In the hearts of many existences, Lu Feng was only able to defeat the Abyss Wolf by relying on temporarily entering the battle will. But now, no one thought so anymore. This kind of power boost was more than twice as powerful as before. The current Lu Feng was enough to stand in the realm of the Emperor of Massacre. He could even be considered the most powerful Emperor of Massacre. The will of an emperor was extremely dense at this moment. Lu Feng swept his gaze across and looked at all the spectators around him. No matter what realm the Emperor of Massacre was, no matter how terrifying the powerhouse was, they all trembled slightly under Lu Feng's gaze. They understood that the current Lu Feng was no longer the simple Lu Feng from before. He had already descended the will of the human king into his body. Although it was just a trace, the existence of the human king was absolutely not something that any deity could imagine. I am the emperor. All of you submit. Finally, Lu Feng reached out a finger and lightly tapped, making the entire sky tremble. The 5 emperors of Massacre in front of him were all subjected to the most terrifying suppression on the spiritual level. Cold sweat poured down like water and their bodies trembled. In their opinion, the current Lu Feng was too honorable, too great. It actually made them have the impulse to completely submit to him. I was born great, the pinnacle genius of my race. Among my peers, who can compete with me? Looking at the billions of races in the universe, I am also one of the most monstrous existences. Lu Feng, you only borrowed the power of the ancestor. What qualifications do you have to make me submit and make you my emperor? Dream on. You're dreaming. They were the emperors of Massacre. Even if it was the human king, he was only their idol. They did not need to, could not submit. They could not endure it any longer. Finally, after their auras soared to the extreme, one of the emperors of Massacre made his move. This move was a powerful martial skill, a supreme strike that could tear apart the dome of the sky. The berserk power shattered the void, causing the entire earth to tremble endlessly. This was a supreme strike of slaughter, a peerless strike that broke through in despair. The cold light in Lu Feng's eyes became more and more obvious, almost becoming solid. His dignity was once again being challenged endlessly. So he wanted to kill, suppress. He softly spat out 2 words. In the next moment, Lu Feng seemed to fuse with the phantom. The human king's power was borrowed by Lu Feng, and a giant palm fell down from the sky. There was no martial skill, no power, but this strike had a terrifying power that made one despair. The powerful strike of the foreign race's Emperor of Massacre, facing that heaven-reaching phantom, had no way to do anything. In an instant, a figure flew out, crashing into the stands with a terrifying speed, stirring up dust that filled the sky, boundless and unrestrained. Everyone was completely dumbfounded. They looked in Lu Feng's direction, filled with an indescribable color. Such a strike was simply too horrifying. This is the human king's bloodline? This is the terror of the human king's bloodline. Borrowing the human king's will, fusing with the phantom. At this moment, he is the human king. At this moment, he is invincible. At this moment, who can resist him? Who can resist him? A stretch of silence. These people did not think that Lu Feng could actually stimulate the human king's bloodline to such a degree. Since ancient times, those with the divine king's bloodline, those who could borrow the divine king's will, were all peerless and unparalleled existences. This was because fighting with them was equivalent to fighting with the divine king's will. Although it was only a tiny bit of it. But what kind of supreme existence was the divine king? Even if it was only the tiniest bit, it was not something that anyone could bear. In the endless void, the Lu family's ancestor was laughing crazily at this moment. He looked in Lu Feng's direction, and all his previous dissatisfaction had vanished. Now there was only endless madness. Human king's bloodline. This is the most powerful human king's bloodline in the history of our Lu family. Finally, we have waited for this day. He, Lu Feng, can finally induce the appearance of the human king's will. If one day, he, Lu Feng, can set foot in the divine king's realm, then he will be equivalent to the rebirth of the human king. He will be another invincible progenitor of the human king. Among those of the same generation, who can rival him? Who can rival him? Invincible. This is invincible. This is a king. Among those of the same generation, he will be crowned a king. At this moment, Lu Feng was a king, an emperor. The 5 emperors of massacre might have been invincible existences in the past, but when faced with Lu Feng's current state, they were just a joke. The emperor of massacre that had been sent flying earlier slowly flew over. However, there was still an indescribable fear on his face. He looked at Lu Feng, full of unwillingness. He stood in his previous position again and felt Lu Feng's invincible will, which was enough to suppress heaven and earth. His heart started to sink completely into madness. He looked at the 4 emperors of massacre around him, who were equally frightened, and spoke slowly with endless madness. We are all of the divine king's bloodline. We are all lineal inheritors, and we are incomparably noble by nature. This battle is no longer about victory or defeat. This is a battle for our dignity. So burn. Let our noble blood be equally crazy. The 4 emperors of massacre nodded gently. Now, it was no longer a matter of whether they recognized Lu Feng as a newly ascended emperor or not. It was a battle for their glory. They were all of the divine king's lineal blood. How could they allow themselves to be inferior? So, the real combustion, the final battle. The 5 emperors of massacre carried out their final frenzy. Their greatest trump card, the power of their bloodline, finally began to be completely shaken and burned completely. In a haze, 5 terrifying visions that could overpower heaven and earth were born. It was as if they had crossed the river of time and space to descend into this world. The 5 divine kings' lineal blood, the 5 divine kings' incarnations. Although they are not like Lu Feng, who can summon the will of the human king, they are already existences with the richest bloodline. This time, it is the 5 divine king. The glorious divine king, the silent divine king, the troubled times of the divine king, the martial dramas of the divine king, and the ancient divine king. Their descendants have finally brought their majesty to this world once again. Chapter 204. The phantoms of the 5 divine kings appeared, standing behind the 5 emperors of slaughter. And in front of them, there was only one person, and that was Lu Feng. The 5 divine kings collided with the first divine king since time immemorial. This battle seemed to be no longer a battle between the younger generation. Lu Feng, at this moment, you indeed have the strength to be invincible among your peers. But you're still too far away from making us submit. You can't. The words of one of the emperors of slaughter spread throughout the world, making everyone nod lightly. But facing this, Lu Feng still smiled mockingly. In the next instant, he moved. An invincible vision. The omnipotent human king behind him seemed to have become one with him. Lu Feng's movements were the human king's movements. Every time Lu Feng punched, every time he killed, it was supported by the human king's will. Any attack had to surpass the previous strongest attack. Suppress. 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 Lu Feng also went crazy. After the 5 emperors of slaughter ignited their bloodline power, they could no longer be mentioned in the same breath. They were all young sovereigns. In a pinnacle race like the human race, they were all invincible existences of their generation. But now, these 5 invincible existences were working together to resist Lu Feng's existence. 3 consecutive strikes of terrifying power sent the 3 emperors of massacre flying far away. But this kind of power was not enough to seriously injure them. All of a sudden, the other 2 terrifying attacks had arrived and landed on Lu Feng's body. Countless drops of golden blood were as resplendent as a flower at this moment, quiet and beautiful. The power of the human king's bloodline was rapidly circulating. In an instant the injury was healed. But everyone could feel that Lu Feng's power was decreasing bit by bit. A furious roar pierced through the sky. With a hand holding up the sky, Lu Feng punched down again. It seemed to ignore any kind of slaughter, ignoring the Divine King's terrifying martial technique. Sent flying. Sent flying. He was constantly sent flying. When had the 5 slaughter emperors ever been humiliated like this? They could only rely on their teamwork to attack Lu Feng's body. At other times, they could only wander around the periphery, unable to do anything. Lu Feng, who ignited a peak sovereign personage bloodline, is simply too strong. Among the Emperor of Slaughter, he was the only one with such strength. I'm afraid that other than the King of Massacre, there's no one else who can rival him. The 5 great monarchs are the supreme beings of the younger generation. In any race, they would be the pinnacle geniuses of this generation, the most brilliant brilliance. However, at this moment, even though the 5 of them had joined forces, they were still sent flying by Lu Feng. Sad, sad. No matter what, it's enough that a God-slayer has appeared among the humans. We will definitely not allow another emperor to appear. There may not be a chance in the slaughter abyss, and there may not be a great chance in the human race either. However, as long as he takes a step out of the galaxy, we must kill him at all costs. This Lu Feng, as long as he reaches the peak of the virtual king and reaches the quasi-king realm, I'm afraid he'll be a supreme otherworldly supreme being capable of suppressing an ordinary divine king. Our race will definitely not allow such a combat power to appear among the humans. Obliterate. Obliterate. Think of all ways to completely obliterate him. Many foreign race beings who had seen everything about Lu Feng began to use all kinds of secret techniques to transmit information. The instructions they received were all the same. That was to obliterate him. They had to completely obliterate Lu Feng at all costs. In the past, a God-slayer caused the younger generation of the billions of races in the universe to tremble in fear. If the Netherworld King hadn't forcefully revived and cut off Lu Tao's path to becoming a divine king at the last moment, then in the future, the human race would have very likely produced an existence infinitely close to being invincible, close to becoming a sovereign personage. This is something the other races don't want to see, something they can't see. This Lu Feng's bloodline seems to be even more powerful and rich than Lu Tao's. Then his danger level will increase even more. Since that's the case, we can't let him step into the quasi-king realm, or even the virtual king realm. Therefore, we must do everything we can to completely obliterate him as long as we find an opportunity. At this moment, when Lu Feng's bloodline power was fully released, in the hearts of many foreign race beings, his danger level had even surpassed his father, Lu Tao, the most talented person in the past 500 years. In the sky, the battle had already entered a frenzied state. Lu Feng was crazy, as if he was the giant sovereign personage projection. Every punch was abnormally deep and filled with absolute violence. The 5 emperors of Massacre were the same. They were also crazed to the extreme. After igniting the bloodline of their respective ancestors, the Divine King, their strength also began to increase continuously. Lu Feng's body had already been pierced through countless holes. Dripping with blood, he looked like a corpse. The sovereign personage's bloodline power flashed continuously, but the speed of repair could no longer keep up with the speed of destruction. His eyes were ferocious, Lu Feng's bloodthirsty sky. Kill. Suppress for me. It was another powerful and violent strike, easily suppressing a king of Massacre who had just arrived from the void in the land of Massacre. Millions of dust clouds were stirred up, causing this super-killing ground that could withstand the battle of perfect emperors of Massacre to slowly crack. With great difficulty, the Emperor of Massacre that had been smashed into pieces by Lu Feng on the ground struggled to crawl out. He had already been suppressed and sent flying by Lu Feng many times. If not for the fact that he had completely ignited the bloodline of the Divine King, he would probably have been smashed into pieces. But even so, he was still in an abnormally miserable state. Looking at the sky, where Lu Feng's golden blood had already filled the air, a complicated expression flashed across his eyes. In the next moment, with a roar, he actually soared into the sky again. The chaotic battle erupted once again. Chunwei, don't go. This is Xiaofeng's battle. If you take action, he won't be happy. Looking at Lu Feng, who seemed to have walked to the edge of the abyss of death, Yan Chunwei finally wanted to take action. She was a peak true god, an exceptional emperor of massacre at the level of a monster. Once she took action, she could easily change the operation of heaven and earth. However, the moment she took action, she was completely blocked by someone. And the person who blocked her was Lu Tao. Hearing Lu Tao's words, Yan Chunwei, who was about to fly into a rage, had a look of struggle in her eyes. However, she still raised her arm. Even if Xiaofeng blames me, I will still take action. He is my son. Even if he resents me for the rest of my life, I will not let him get hurt. After saying this, a powerful force was already mobilized. However, this time, it was Lu Tao who stopped her again. Lu Tao, what are you doing? Yan Chunwei's face was already cold. However, this time, her anger did not make Lu Tao retreat. His arm pressed down on Yan Chunwei, but in his eyes, there was only the battle in the distance. Chunwei. From the moment Xiaofeng chose to walk on this path, everything was already destined. You can help him once, twice. Can you help him forever? Xiaofeng's future. It is not something you can imagine. I know that he's hiding a lot of secrets. Even I can't imagine what his future will be like. This is a difficult path of massacre. Countless thorns and bumps are everywhere. Death and oblivion will constantly intertwine. This time, it is Xiaofeng's own choice. You, let him be willful for once. Yan Chunwei was stunned. She turned around and looked at Lu Feng, who was in an extremely miserable state on the battlefield, yet she'd already stopped all her actions. Because she'd seen the light that flickered without end within Lu Feng's eyes. Perhaps it was called madness in the eyes of others, but Yan Chunwei, who'd watched Lu Feng grow up, knew that it was persistence. It was unyieldingness. The hidden dragon of the 9 heavens is bound to the abyss. The dark parasol tree has been broken into the sky. Lu Feng was a true dragon of the 9 heavens that was bound in a boundless abyss. In the past, he was extremely weak and had no natural talent in any aspect, and he was an extremely ordinary person. But it was different now. He'd already awakened the bloodline of the first mortal king, and he'd shattered the dark parasol's abyss with a single leap. Henceforth, he would roam the 9 heavens and command the sky. Perhaps what you said is right. Yan Chunwei sighed deeply as she looked at the child, who was completely covered in golden blood, and her eyes revealed an expression of extreme pity. But in the end, she didn't make a move. Lu Tao smiled lightly when he sensed the change in his wife, and there was only extreme determination in his eyes. Chunwei, actually, you don't understand Xiaofeng. I wasn't joking when I said that his future is even vaster than mine, and it's the truth. He's probably going to erupt next, right? The situation at the scene took a sudden turn for the worse. The 5 great emperors of slaughter utilized the martial skills of the Divine King, and their power rose explosively once more. On the other hand, even though Lu Feng was able to firmly suppress them in a single battle, and he was even able to easily resist and suppress 2 of them, he was already powerless when their numbers increased to 5. At the beginning, Lu Feng was still able to rely on his formidable eruption to completely suppress them, but as the battle continued, he became more and more powerless. His heavily injured body faintly started to become difficult to even resist one of the emperors of slaughter. Numerous existences sighed lightly as they watched everything that occurred at the scene. No wonder he dares to threaten to surpass the human king. Although there have been countless extreme Tao monstrous geniuses in many eras who have made such a grand wish, there hasn't been such an existence until now. The human king will always be the human king. However, this Lu Feng is really a little frightening. He's able to resist 5 great emperors by himself, and he's even able to suppress them at his current level. His strength is indeed a little unimaginable. Although the current him might not be enough to be titled the King of Slaughter, he's already an absolutely invincible existence among the emperors of slaughter. If he's given a little more time, he'll completely master the supreme code of the human king's bloodline, the human king's scripture. I'm afraid he'll be another extreme Tao monstrous genius on par with the King Slayer. There was no need for the rest of the battle to continue. If Lu Feng had been able to directly suppress all of them at the beginning, then he would have had a slight chance of winning. Unfortunately, Lu Feng pursued too much of a strong suppression. He wanted to use absolute violence to completely destroy everything. And this was what led to his eventual defeat. After entering the martialist realm, he should be able to completely master the human king's cultivation technique. When that happens, his combat strength will increase again. This time, there's really something to see. In the past, his father forged an immortal reputation by killing. Now, his son is actually just as domineering. There's less than 10 years until this year's convention of the myriad races. Who knows how far he'll progress in 10 years? Although Lu Feng's arrogance had angered many people, they couldn't help but sigh when they saw Lu Feng's defeat. After all, Lu Feng represented the human king's bloodline, which was the strongest in the current era. Even so, his defeat was still an honorable one. After all, his opponents were the direct descendants of the 5 divine king. They were the 5 great young paragons recognized by the universe. Who could take advantage of the 5 great young paragons? Being able to do so was already extremely terrifying. Famous in one battle, the current Lu Feng can be considered the number 1 person below the extreme Tao monstrous geniuses. His name will definitely shake the entire galaxy and universe. With such strength, he's almost at the level of the King of Slaughter. If it's the King of Slaughter, being able to resist and suppress 3 emperors of slaughter and remain undefeated while being besieged by 5 emperors of slaughter is already the limit. Lu Feng is really not bad. Countless sighs stopped, as everything in the arena was about to end magnificently. Chapter 205. Right now, Lu Feng's entire body was completely submerged in the golden ocean. This was his blood, his noble blood of a human king. In his eyes, there was a kind of endless obsession and madness. But apart from this, his face was still so majestic, making people think of a supreme king. Finally, following the Emperor of Massacre's heaven-swallowing attack, Lu Feng directly fell to the ground. A huge crater with a diameter of 50 meters appeared on the ground just like that. This was one of the 5 ultimate killing grounds. The materials here were incomparably solid, and even if the gods appeared, they couldn't damage too much. But these 6 high-level warriors had made this place so modeled. The prestige of the young Supremes was nothing more than this. The 5 young Supremes, once the bloodline is activated, under the extreme eruption, they are definitely between the upheaval stage and the evolution stage. They are absolutely invincible in the evolution stage, but they can't win against the upheaval stage. And Lu Feng should be at the initial stage of the upheaval stage. This should be the upper limit of their strength. The king of the younger generation, in the advanced warrior realm, should have the strength to suppress a initial stage upheaval stage. I think if Lu Feng has a human king technique, or uses a supreme technique, he should enter the king realm for a short time. He is really not bad. Slowly climbing out of the deep crater. Lu Feng couldn't even stand now. The boiling blood was about to stop, and his strength had reached the limit. Fight again? Relying on the bloodline, he already didn't have the strength to fight anymore. If Lu Feng's trump card was like this, Then, as these spectators thought, it would end like this. Unfortunately, Lu Feng wasn't. He still had a trump card. There was an even more powerful existence. Originally, I didn't intend to use my final trump card. But now it seems that it's already impossible. At this point in the battle, Lu Feng had already understood everything. He finally understood Tu Tianxin's level. The young Tu Tianxin, that Tu Tianxin of the advanced warrior realm, wasn't the emperor of massacre in his imagination. He was the king of slaughter. Although his physical body only had a threefold increase, his combat strength was definitely on par with the king of massacre. As for Lu Feng, he could even suppress Tu Tianxin for a short period of time without using his final trump card. In that case, he definitely had the strength of the king of slaughter. Previously, Lu Feng only wanted to rely on the extreme activation of his bloodline so that he could fight against the 5 rulers and take advantage of the situation to break through. But now, it seemed that he had been too naive. The combined power of the 5 emperors of slaughter far surpassed that of a single king of slaughter. They weren't fighting him head-on at all. They were relying on time to slowly wear him down. However, this wasn't of much help to Lu Feng's breakthrough. Therefore, Lu Feng no longer held back. He had finally decided to reach the pinnacle of cultivation. Since you don't want to face me head-on, why don't you give me a chance? Then I will leave you with no choice. Lu Feng's voice was so obvious in this empty space. Everyone looked at Lu Feng in a daze. At their current level, they could even hear the slightest sound from 1,000 miles away. However, when Lu Feng said these words, they were doubting whether they had heard wrongly. He said, "This isn't his peak strength? Is this a joke? This was definitely a huge joke. Such combat strength, which could be said to be invincible under the king realm, was actually not his peak strength? Could it be that he's really a king realm? He actually has the combat strength of the king of slaughter." In the past 700 years, the number of emperors of slaughter that were born from the massacre abyss was in the thousands. Almost every year, a new emperor of slaughter was born. However, there were only 4 kings of slaughter. The king of slaughter was known as the supreme king among the younger generation. It also had another name, which was the divine king's potential. Now, Lu Feng actually said that his strength hadn't reached the pinnacle. He actually still had a trump card that he hadn't used? One had to know that he was now at the peak of the Emperor of Slaughter. Using a supreme technique could temporarily stop at the King of Slaughter realm. Once he used his trump card, wouldn't that mean that he was really the King of Slaughter? Slowly, Lu Feng forcefully propped up his broken body and finally stood up from the ground. His eyes were scarlet. However, everyone could see that it was an expression of endless madness and bloodlust. Seeing this scene, everyone was stunned. However, Lu Tao smiled. Tu Tianxin, who was far away in the endless space, also smiled. They knew that Lu Feng was finally no longer holding back and was going to use his strongest trump card. A shocking aura began to slowly appear. Behind Lu Feng, the huge phantom of the human king was already constantly blurring. Usually, the blurring of the phantom represented the exhaustion of the bloodline power and was no longer able to support the increase of that huge power. However, at this moment there were people who really dared to think so. Because Lu Feng had said that he still had a trump card, the phantom of the human king had already become an endless blur. However, in the next moment, a voice appeared, resounding through the ancient firmament, intimidating everything in eternity. "Great demon, true body, copper body, great demon." In the void, the phantom of the human king had completely faded. However, the moment Lu Feng's voice landed, that blurry phantom emitted a shocking power. In the position of that blurry face, 2 rays of light that could see through everything slowly appeared. Many existences knew that those were the positions of the eyes. Those were the eyes that were slowly opening. Everything around had already changed. The overbearing aura of the human king was still there, but it had added an even more terrifying majesty. That was a kind of chaos, a kind of eternity, a kind of invincible will to obliterate. Demon. At this moment, everyone unconsciously said the same word. They did not understand why they knew, but the moment they saw that phantom and that aura appeared, the same word unconsciously appeared in their minds. On his body, the golden color was even more conspicuous. However, in this golden color, there was a bronze color mixed in. Lu Feng's body began to gradually change. Although his overall appearance did not change in the slightest, everyone knew that Lu Feng had already transformed. When that bronze color appeared, he became even more terrifying, even more unfathomable. The power of the great demon was fully activated, the true essence of his bloodline was endlessly boiling. At this moment, Lu Feng shattered all shackles. This was his peak state when he fought with Tu Tianxin. In the past, he had not comprehended the realm, but by relying on this peak state, he was almost able to suppress Tu Tianxin, the king of massacre. Now, everything had entered the peak state, and he had taken another step on the path of martial arts. After the nobility of his heart and soul had condensed into greatness once again, Lu Feng was even more terrifying. The King of Massacre. This is definitely the power of the King of Massacre. This Lu Feng actually has the power of the King of Massacre. The fifth one. In the Massacre Abyss, the fifth King of Massacre. One family with two kings, the Lu family. Is this a sign that they are about to recover their former glory? The human king bloodline is finally about to reveal its sharpest fangs. Obliterate him. No matter what, we must obliterate him with everything we have. One family with two kings. Give the Lu family some time, and their Lu family can give birth to at least two other Path Supreme beings. At that time, in the entire universe, who can contend against the human king bloodline? Who can suppress the human king bloodline? Countless people were frightened and roaring. Even the foreign race experts hidden in the void revealed their sharp fangs at this moment. They had already decided to obliterate Lu Feng at all costs. In the past, the path of massacre, which had killed gods, had already suppressed the entire universe to the point that no one dared to call themselves a king. Now Lu Feng, whose bloodline was even more terrifying, had appeared. It seemed like everything was about to repeat itself. They could not allow such a scene to happen again. Human King Palace, in the pure land of bliss. 10 terrifying existences slowly awakened. The laws of the universe were extinguished, space-time rotated, and time surrendered. The 10 of them were all peerless and unrivaled supreme experts. Their representatives were the symbols of all power. Just by existing, they meant that they were invincible. The great ancestor woke up and looked at the 10 people in front of him with a serious expression. You should already know everything. It's time to appear. The human king bloodline is not to be humiliated. Go. Do everything you can to ensure Lu Feng's safety. Teach all living beings who covet the human king bloodline an unforgettable lesson. The 10 terrifying existences slowly opened their eyes and nodded gently in the direction of the great ancestor. Then 10 spatial cracks appeared. In an instant, the 10 of them disappeared. Teachers, he is the hope of humankind. He is the hope of the Psyche Master lineage to prove ourselves. Therefore, this time, I'm counting on you. In the realm of time, Dao Songtian had a respectful expression as he bowed to the 3 frozen stone coffins. As his voice fell, the 3 stone coffins suddenly opened. 3 old men with aged faces but incomparably benevolent expressions slowly walked out of the coffins. They nodded slightly, and then began to enter the space-time turbulence. Seeing the 3 ancestors of the Federal University disappear, Dao Songtian's eyes shone brightly. He looked at the endless space-time and murmured, Lu Feng, I won't let anything happen to you. The human race won't let anything happen to you. The lesson of killing a god is enough. The human race won't tolerate it a second time. A few ancient super-life-bearing planets awakened with terrifying majesty. Those were all terrifying and invincible experts. As they awakened, the billions of humans on the life-bearing planets called out to their ancestors. Then, they tore through the void and completely disappeared into the endless sky. Old friends, I didn't expect a junior to wake all of us up. How rare, it can't be helped. Who asked him to have the ability to make me appear? The god-slaying war destroyed the hope of the human race. This time, we definitely can't let such a situation happen again. After more than 500 years of silence, these foreign races have forgotten the strength of the human race in the past. This time, the human race's revival will begin. The various experts of the Federation had already begun to move. Many ancient existences walked out of their decaying palaces. They were willing to go to war in order to protect Lu Feng. Apart from them, the other foreign races that received the news also did the same. Among them, the underworld race, which was close to the human race, even had 3 ancestors. Countless experts gathered in the direction of the Dian galaxy. However, Lu Feng didn't know this now. He was really at his peak now. He had truly reached the peak of his strength. Chapter 206. The appearance of the bronze great demon body, the appearance of the great demon power, and the support of the great demon phantom caused Lu Feng's combat power to soar once again. Without a doubt, the current him had already surpassed the power he had when he collided with Tu Tian in the past. And Tu Tian was the king of massacre. Hence, the current Lu Feng was fully deserving of the title of King of Massacre. The 5 emperors of massacre had looks of disbelief on their faces. When Lu Feng collided with the Abyss Wolf, Lu Feng was just a lucky person in their hearts. If he hadn't entered the battle consciousness, he probably wouldn't have been able to break through the Abyss Wolf's attack. At that time, Lu Feng should have been on the verge of becoming an emperor. And when Lu Feng said those arrogant words, these people treated Lu Feng, the Lu family, and even Lu Feng's parents, Slayer God and Queen Wei, as a joke. However, with Lu Feng's powerful outburst, when the bloodline power that even surpassed Lu Tao's boiled, these people finally understood how terrifying and powerful Lu Feng was. That was almost the combat power of the King of Massacre. The power of one person going against the 5 emperors of massacre was unprecedented. However, Lu Feng did it, and he even resisted for such a long time. When Lu Feng was finally about to be defeated, everyone no longer had looks of ridicule on their faces. They understood that Lu Feng might not be able to become a terrifying supreme being like the human king, but once he reached the level of a supreme being in the universe, then relying on his human king bloodline, it was really possible for him to dominate an era. Just when everyone thought that everything was about to end beautifully, a sudden change occurred again. Everything happened so suddenly that it was unimaginable. Just when everyone thought that Lu Feng was still a little arrogant, Lu Feng used his own power to shut all the people who doubted him up. The King of Massacre was the existence of the Divine King's potential. He was the supreme being of the younger generation. Then he, Lu Feng, would be the pinnacle of the universe. He was an extreme, monstrous genius. The power of the great demon had never appeared before, but when it did, it caused the world to tremble. At this moment, Lu Feng was an emperor, a king, an emperor. However, he was a king who was filled with endless demonic nature. Under the support of the great demonic power and complete bloodline boil, all of his injuries were instantly restored to their original state. At this moment, Lu Feng had once again returned to his peak, a peak that was even more powerful than before. In an instant, he disappeared. The next moment, he appeared beside the Emperor of Massacre. When he punched out, no one could believe the power contained within it. This strike clearly didn't contain any of the Divine King's martial techniques, but the explosive power easily broke through the 300-fold limit. Without a doubt, before Lu Feng reached his peak, he could already send any king of slaughter flying with a single punch. At this moment, the massacring emperor, who was already in a weakened state, could not resist at all. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. His body was on the verge of shattering. This punch was many times more terrifying than their powerful attacks. Against Lu Feng, they simply did not have the slightest bit of power to resist. As he stared coldly at the 4 remaining kings of massacre in the sky, Lu Feng's eyes burned even more crazily. "I've already reached one of my limits. If you still want to fight me using the same method as before, then you will definitely fail. Then, failure will be inevitable." Lu Feng was right. If they continued to divide their strength, they simply wouldn't have the slightest chance of victory. Against Lu Feng, who was at the King of Massacre realm, these weakened kings of massacre had no way of fighting back. The King of Massacre, who had been almost crippled by Lu Feng, was the clearest example. After a moment of silence, Lu Feng said, "I will give you all a chance. A chance to clash head-on with me. Unleash your greatest strength and fight with me. Let me see what kind of ultimate power you have after going against my rule." Previously, when Lu Feng had asked them to submit instead of acknowledge him, everyone had thought that it was a joke. However, when Lu Feng unleashed his full power, they suddenly realized that everything should be like this. Lu Feng indeed had the absolute power to dominate the younger generation. When they heard this, the 4 kings of massacre fell silent. They exchanged glances and finally saw the craziness and fighting spirit in each other's eyes. The King of Massacre from the underworld tribe walked out and looked at Lu Feng. He said slowly, "King of Massacre, we never thought that you would actually be the King of Massacre, who is no weaker than your father." "Very good, very good. Lu Feng, regardless of whether you win this battle or not, I, Yuan Tong, acknowledge your strength. I, Skeleton, acknowledge your strength. I, Feiqiong, acknowledge your strength. I, Dalan Lugu, acknowledge your strength." 4 voices came from the mouths of the 4 kings of massacre. They had already acknowledged Lu Feng's status as the King of Massacre. They had already acknowledged that Lu Feng's title as the King of Massacre lived up to his name. "And I, Luanju, acknowledge your strength, Lu Feng." The King of Massacre, who had almost been killed by Lu Feng, finally stood up. He said his words with difficulty. Then, he took out an ancient elixir and swallowed it. "Lu Feng, I will use my peak state to clash with you. This is my acknowledgement of you, my respect for you. It is also an explanation for me." Soon, the 4 slaughtering emperors did the same thing. The elixirs that they had used to fight for their lives were all swallowed. To them, although the elixirs were precious and not worth using in such a competition, they still used them against Lu Feng, the brand new King of Massacre. Because an incomplete state was a sign of disrespect to the king. Even if they did not acknowledge Lu Feng as their ruler, they still gave enough respect to the strong. In an instant, the 5 kings of massacre, who had taken the elixirs, returned to their peak state. At this moment, they were even a little stronger than before. Previously, they were already between the upheaval stage and the evolution stage martial artists. Now, after taking the elixirs, they definitely had the strength of upheaval stage beginner stage. The 6 people in the arena were all peak advanced warriors, but their true strength was enough to challenge any upheaval stage warrior. This was the Kings of Massacre, the terrifying peerless evildoers and extreme evildoers. Looking at the 5 people who had entered an even more peak state, Lu Feng was laughing crazily. At this moment, his aura had also begun to rise. Finally, the 5 kings of massacre looked at each other and did not care about other people's opinions. They used their final trump card. Supreme Law, Destiny. Supreme Law, Void Cold Orchid. Supreme Law, Change Heaven and Earth. Supreme Law. Supreme Law. The 5 emperors of slaughter were all using their supreme techniques. They were going all out. They wanted to use their final blow to prove that their glory had not withered. In the face of all this, Lu Feng also began his final madness. Kill. Let me, at the edge of death, at the abyss of oblivion, make my final breakthrough. I am the Emperor! I am the Emperor! This was the strongest move that Lu Feng had created and condensed. It was the first and only move that appeared in his Soul Venerable. After comprehending the true Emperor's will and integrating his endless noble destiny with the Emperor's Qi, Lu Feng had truly achieved the level of the Emperor's descent and the subjugation of heaven and earth. Void Chaos, this was the killing of Upheaval Stage Warrior. The final blow of the 5 Kings of Massacre was comparable to the powerful blow of a mid-stage Upheaval Stage Warrior. And Lu Feng's blow could even obliterate a low-stage Upheaval Stage Warrior and severely injure a mid-stage Upheaval Stage Warrior. This had already exceeded the limit of killing and destruction of 1,000,000 stars. In the void, the collision finally appeared. Faintly, the sky lost its color, and even the void began to tremble. What a powerful killing power! Is this the strength of a high-level warrior? This is the peak of the universe's geniuses. This represents the ultimate power of a high-level warrior in the universe. Crazy, invincible. Give them time, what else can stop them from dominating the era? Countless spectators' emotions were stirred up. Although in the eyes of many, such power was not enough to threaten them at all. But in such an atmosphere, they still could not help but feel the same fear, tremble, and go crazy. Kill! Kill! In the void, the last 5 voices came out. At this moment, the most terrifying collision of the 6. It was the collision of the 5 divine kings, a terrifying illusion of a king or a demon. The sky fell and the earth cracked. This was really the sky falling and the earth cracking. Such an extreme collision fused everything, and the destructive power produced had already reached the destructive power of several million stars. The destructive power of several million stars, that was a power that could smash a fast-moving large comet into powder in the void. If the collision did not take place in the greatest killing ground, then under their feet, everything within a radius of 100,000 miles would be completely shattered and turned into nothingness. But even so, the appearance of this destruction still shocked countless powerhouses. For them, the strength of a martial artist in the Upheaval Stage Warrior was really nothing. But the problem was that the ones who used this power were a group of existences that were not even martial artists. This is the strength of the Kings of Massacre. This is the strength of the Kings of Massacre. They are really too terrifying. The setting of the level was originally to distinguish the realm, but these people completely ignored the existence of the realm. As long as they wanted, anything would be shattered, and everything would be broken. This was a truly unparalleled power. In the collision, everyone could see countless voids shattering, and they could see the patterns of fate dissipating. They could see blood splattering. It was like the scene of the end of the world. The ground under their feet was shattered into countless existences. This was once the place where the perfect stage kings of massacre fought. And here, more than one king of massacre was born. The sturdiness of this place was difficult for even those existences that could almost go against the gods to destroy easily. But at this moment, under the collision of these 6 people, a terrifying deep pit with a diameter of 100 meters was blasted out below. Such a scene was really unbelievable. The 5 Kings of Massacre had all taken medicinal pills, and they were all existences that had surpassed their strongest realm. Previously, they were only between the peak evolution stage and upheaval stage warriors. After taking the medicinal pills, they finally broke through the shackles and entered the realm of early-stage upheaval stage warriors. And Lu Feng definitely had the strength to suppress an upheaval stage warrior. The collision between them had already become the most extreme collision among high-level warriors. It was already an unimaginable limit. Suddenly, everyone could see the bodies of the 5 young Supremes strangely distorted. They saw their arms being destroyed, their legs broken, and countless sparkling bones appearing. They could see Lu Feng's blood spreading, and 5 large transparent holes appearing in his body. Chapter 207. Finally, after a long wait, the final outcome was revealed. Broken bodies appeared, and 6 figures were sent flying. Countless people were shaken as they tore through the void. 7 figures instantly appeared behind the 6 people. These 7 existences were all terrifyingly mighty, surpassing deities. The moment they appeared, they channeled all their power into the 6 people who were seriously injured so that they wouldn't die on the spot. Many existences sighed softly when they saw this scene. They knew that there was no winner or loser in this battle. In the end, both sides would suffer great losses. The commotion in the sky gradually calmed down. Finally, everyone was completely silent. They looked in Lu Feng's direction with an indescribable expression. Previously, the impression that Lu Feng had given them was that he was arrogant. During the great battle against the Abyss Wolf, he had barely defeated the Abyss Wolf when he had entered the battle-intent state. Only then had he reached the threshold of the Emperor of Massacre. However, Lu Feng hadn't asked anyone to acknowledge him. Instead, he had made an extremely crazy vow. He had actually vowed to surpass the human monarch. Although countless evildoers had made such a grand wish since ancient times, a human monarch was still a human monarch. There was only one human monarch. Previously, when Lu Feng had made such a vow, what had been waiting for him had been a joke. A joke for everyone. This had been Lu Feng's joke. It had been the joke of the Lu family, a human monarch family. It had even been the joke of Lu Feng's parents killing deities and Empress Wei. Subsequently, Lu Feng had even wanted to make the 5 emperors of Massacre submit to him. This had made everyone see Lu Feng's ignorance even more clearly. However, in just a few minutes, when Lu Feng ignited his own human monarch bloodline and burned it furiously to fight the 5 young supremes alone, all the jokes had come to a standstill. No one had expected that Lu Feng would actually have such strength. One had to know that even a king of Massacre could only suppress 2 or 3 emperors of Massacre and ensure that he wouldn't be defeated when besieged by 5 emperors of Massacre. However, Lu Feng had persisted for so long. At that moment, Lu Feng had already been recognized as the Emperor of Slaughter, the number 1 person below the King of Slaughter. But, everything had never stopped. He, Lu Feng, actually still had a trump card. Lu Feng was already at the peak of the King of Massacre. When he had another trump card, it meant that he was truly the King of Massacre. The King of Slaughter, just these 4 words were enough to explain a lot. Any King of Massacre had the right to be arrogant. They represented the pinnacle of the monstrous geniuses. They were the ultimate monstrous geniuses. And the King of Massacre meant that he had the potential to become the divine king. Lu Feng really had that kind of potential. Thus, from the looks of it now, while his previous words might have been arrogant, they were definitely not ignorant, nor were they a joke. At that moment, seeing the severely injured Lu Feng lying in Emperor Wei's arms, all the spectators let out a long sigh. They knew that if Lu Feng hadn't challenged the Emperor of Massacre, he would have been the King of Massacre by now. In the past 700 years, the Massacre Abyss has given birth to no less than 1,000 Emperors of Massacre. Basically, a new Emperor of Massacre would be born every year. However, there have only been 4 Kings of Massacre in the past 700 years. These 4 existences are basically invincible existences of an era. They have swept across billions of galaxies, killed countless living beings, and used countless lives to accumulate immortal fame. Although the King of Massacre and the Emperor of Massacre are only 1 level apart, the difference in strength between them is like the difference between heaven and earth. To be able to become the King of Massacre, Lu Feng indeed has the right to be arrogant, everyone sighed. They looked at Lu Feng with complicated expressions. If he had chosen to fight a battle of attrition, then the 5 Emperors of Massacre wouldn't have been a match for him. However, he chose to suppress them. He wants to fight and suppress the 5 emperors of Massacre, which is a little unwise. One of the emperors of Massacre's eyes wavered slightly as he spoke his mind. However, upon hearing this, another emperor of Massacre beside him shook his head gently. Sibu, you are wrong. Actually, Lu Feng's choice is his true path. Do you still remember what his title is? Title? Sibu was slightly taken aback. However, in the next moment, he seemed to have thought of something. Finally, a look of disappointment appeared on his face. The Emperor. His title is the Emperor. Since he is the Emperor, he must have the dignity of an Emperor. An Emperor must have the will to suppress everything. If he chooses to fight separately, then is he still the Emperor Lu Feng? From the moment both sides were injured in the void, Lu Feng's title had been confirmed. He was the Emperor of Massacre, the only supreme emperor among the young sovereigns. I'm really looking forward to having a hot-blooded battle with him. Many of the spectators began to leave the scene. They had already felt the strange atmosphere. These people understood what the appearance of the Emperor of Massacre meant. Perhaps even the incomparably terrifying gods would not be able to resist the madness of the countless races. However, just as they took a step forward, a familiar aura came and made them all stop in their tracks. At this moment, everyone's face revealed an unusually twisted expression. However, these people soon seemed to have thought of something. They let out a long sigh. Great madness, but it is truly great perseverance, that's right. In the realm of the advanced warrior, he no longer has any pursuit. Now, if he fully unleashes his combat power, he will definitely have the strength of the Emperor of Massacre. Throughout the entire advanced warrior realm, he has already reached the realm of invincibility. Even if the Divine King was young, he couldn't suppress him. He could only barely resist. He really shouldn't stay in the realm of the advanced warrior. Emperor Lu Feng, your real title should be Emperor. Many people stopped. They quietly looked at Lu Feng, who began to slowly break through in the sky. Once upon a time, only when a peak demigod condensed a divine persona and stepped into the realm of gods could these people have some desire to watch. However, at this moment it was only an advanced warrior who was promoted to a martial artist, but it attracted all of them. If it was in the past, they probably wouldn't have such an idea. However, it was different now. Because Lu Feng, who had entered the martial artist realm, had the surname Lu. He had the bloodline of the human king. He was Emperor Lu Feng. In the sky, Lu Feng's aura became more and more violent. Vaguely, an incomparably noble aura began to spread, causing everyone to unconsciously frown. This kind of aura made them feel really helpless, although Lu Feng's current level was very low. Once he became an existence on the same level as them, they were afraid that this endless noble emperor's will could really affect them. In a battle between peak powerhouses, even a slight influence could change the outcome of the battle. And the influence of Lu Feng's will was definitely not just a little bit. Slowly, everyone looked at Lu Feng, whose aura rapidly increased in the sky, and a strange look appeared on their faces. This was because they realized that Lu Feng's breakthrough was much faster than they had imagined. At this moment, Lu Feng was quietly immersed in his own heart. He could feel the changes in his body, the kind of rebirth, the extreme sublimation of change. In an instant, in the hidden color of the bronze, there was a touch of light that couldn't be concealed. That was gold, that was the color of gold. The second stage of the Great Devil True Body, Golden Body Great Devil, large success. Finally, all the bronze color in his body disappeared. What replaced it was an endless luxurious golden color, as bright as the sunset. Even the golden color of the bloodline couldn't hide it. Lu Feng found out. Although the color of the bloodline was also golden, it looked the same, but when he really felt it, these two kinds of gold were completely different. The golden color in the bloodline belonged to the power of the human king. It was a luxurious imperial gold color, with the majesty of an emperor, resolute and unyielding. But in his body, the golden color derived from the great devil true body was golden. Although it also had the matchless power of an emperor, this kind of power leaned toward a kind of tyranny, a kind of strangeness. This was a kind of demonic gold color. After entering the realm of the golden body great devil, I can use the power of the golden body great devil. At that time, my power will more than double. Lu Feng could feel the terror of the golden body great devil. Once it was upgraded, it almost completely surpassed the blessing of the bloodline power when it was at its strongest. Of course, this boiling referred to before the bloodline awakening. But even so, it was incomparably terrifying. At this moment, Lu Feng was confident. If he had the power of the golden body great devil when he was fighting with the 5 emperors of massacre, the final result would definitely not have been a draw, although he would still have been seriously injured. He would definitely be able to suppress the 5 slaughtering emperors. Finally, at the last moment, the transformation was completed. At this moment, Lu Feng really entered the realm of a warrior. All the injuries on his body disappeared at this moment, completely disappearing without a trace. If they hadn't seen the tragic battle just now, everyone would have doubted the authenticity of the battle just now. So crazy. I can feel that this Lu Feng should be practicing a special kind of cultivation technique. If he wants to break through, he needs to go through countless trials and tribulations to succeed. The reason why the 5 sovereigns unleashed their most powerful attacks during the battle just now was probably because he wanted to experience enough hardships so that he could take advantage of the opportunity to advance. What a madman! Isn't he afraid that he can't bear it and directly die? Chapter 208. Slowly opening his eyes and looking at everything outside, Lu Feng felt that everything was different. Everything that appeared in front of him was still the same as before, but every scene seemed to be different from what it used to be. Lu Feng could faintly see an inexplicable luster flowing above the scenery. After a while, his eyes lit up with excitement. Lu Feng knew that it was the power of heaven and earth. It was the power of heaven and earth that could only be comprehended by a warrior. The power of heaven and earth existed in every corner of the world. Even in the deepest part of the cold universe, there was still the flow of the power of heaven and earth. It could be said that only by comprehending the power of heaven and earth could one be considered to have truly entered the palace of the strong. Only by doing so could one's physical body break free from all restraints and achieve the extent of being able to roam as one pleased. Stretching out his arm, Lu Feng gently drew a line in the air. At this moment, a powerful force gathered in his hand. A bright light appeared in his eyes. Lu Feng could feel the terror of this ball of light. This kind of power definitely surpassed his physical body by hundreds or thousands of times. After entering the realm of a warrior can finally get rid of the embarrassment of only being able to use his physical body. In battle, using the martial path incarnation and the power of heaven and earth can almost enter an unimaginable mythical realm. At this time, even when facing a machine-type telekinesis grandmaster, a warrior will not have the slightest ability to fight back. I finally succeeded, looking at Lu Feng in the sky, who was holding the condensed power of heaven and earth in his hand. Countless strange expressions flashed across everyone's eyes. This Lu Feng is really abnormal. He has just entered the realm of a warrior, but he has already comprehended the power of heaven and earth. He can even condense the power of heaven and earth. I remember that back then, it took me a full day to finally feel the existence of the power of heaven and earth. It took me no less than 3 days to condense the power of heaven and earth. Back then, my achievements were praised by the old ancestors in my tribe. However, compared to Lu Feng Lai Sai, Damon sighed slightly. He had the right to be proud, but at this moment, when compared to Lu Feng, he only had the right to be beaten down. Hearing Demeng's sigh, The shock in Guangran Tianxing's eyes slowly receded. A bitter smile hung on his lips as he said, "Perhaps this is the reason why he can become the king of massacre, while we can only be the king of massacre." He slowly dispersed the condensed power of heaven and earth. Lu Feng heaved a long sigh of relief. At this moment, he finally sensed a familiar aura beside him. Looking at Lu Tao and Yan Chenwei, who were quietly watching him, a trace of warmth appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. He slowly opened his mouth. Dad, Mom, when he was called a good-for-nothing, it was his parents who protected him and encouraged him. When he tried to break through but failed, it was his parents who gave him unlimited confidence. When he was in danger, it was his parents who came to Honglan Star to avenge him and help him vent his anger. Now, he was doubted by tens of thousands of people. No one believed him. Everyone mocked him for overestimating himself. However, at this time, it was still his parents who appeared and gave him the most resolute support. This was his father, and this was his mother. When they heard Lu Feng's voice, Lu Tao and Yan Chenwei's eyes flashed with a doting look. They had watched Lu Feng grow up step by step. They had watched Lu Feng grow from a weakling to where he was today. They were always proud of Lu Feng, regardless of whether Lu Feng was a good-for-nothing or whether Lu Feng was incompetent. He had always been their most precious treasure. He was the treasure that they had to protect with everything they had. Now, Lu Feng had entered an unimaginable realm. They were even more proud. Looking at Lu Feng, Lu Tao did not hide the joy and excitement in his heart. He stretched out his arm and gently patted Lu Feng's shoulders. "Good. Good job. This is my son. This is my Kingslayer's son, Emperor. Lu Feng, father is proud of you." At this moment, when they heard Lu Tao's voice, everyone present was awakened. Emperor. Lu Feng should not be emperor. His title should be emperor. Although he did not challenge the king of massacre. However, the strength that he displayed had definitely reached the level of the king of massacre. In an instant, many people's gazes towards Lu Feng and Lu Tao changed. The entire massacre abyss had gathered billions of geniuses from countless races in the universe over the past 700 years. However, there were only 4 true kings who had walked out. And now, Emperor Lu Feng was the 5th king. The Lu family, or to be exact, Lu Feng's lineage, had 2 kings. 2 kings in one family. What a luxurious honor! What a shocking title! Since ancient times, other than the Di Shitian's lineage of the first type of emperor clan, there had never been a time when someone possessed 2 kings. 2 kings in one family. The rise of the Lu family is almost foreseeable. Good? What's good about it? You shut up. Just as Lu Feng and Lu Tao were immersed in the pride between father and son, a cold voice suddenly interrupted the two of them. However, when he heard this voice, the extremely arrogant Lu Tao really shut his mouth. There was even a hint of helplessness on his face. And Lu Feng, this extremely arrogant existence, was the same at this moment. This was because the person who spoke was Lu Tao's wife, Lu Feng's mother, Yan Chenwei, who was titled Emperor Wei. She looked coldly at Lu Feng, making him unable to say anything. This was because Lu Feng could clearly see the slight wavering in his mother's eyes. "Do you feel that your wings have hardened now? Do you feel that you can no longer consider your parents? Do you feel that I can no longer control you?" The reproachful words made Lu Feng's mouth open slightly. It was a smile. Although Yan Chenwei was reprimanding him, Lu Feng was still smiling. His eyes were also slightly moist. Who was Yan Chenwei? She was one of the 5 most powerful kings of the Golden Generation. She was a peerless figure whose name shook the entire universe. Although she couldn't be compared to Lu Tao, who killed gods, she had also walked out of endless slaughter. Countless god-level powerhouses had fallen at her hands, not to mention other powerhouses. And it was this extremely powerful Emperor of Slaughter whose eyes were slightly red at this moment. Tears swayed as if they were about to fall. The only person who could make Emperor Wei like this was Lu Feng. Only her son, Lu Feng, could make her like this. Finally, just as Yan Chunwei had no intention of stopping, Lu Feng suddenly hugged her. At this moment, Yan Chunwei was completely stunned. How long had it been? She had already forgotten. She had already forgotten how long it had been since Lu Feng snuggled in her arms like this, quietly hugging her like this today. At this moment, all dissatisfaction disappeared. What was left was a kind of speechless silence and an extremely doting look. Everyone in the audience was silent. No one laughed at Lu Feng, and no one laughed at Yan Chunwei. Because this was the relationship between mother and son. It was an existence that surpassed everything in the world. Looking at the incomparably shy and strangely serene Lu Feng, the audience sighed softly. They suddenly remembered that the emperor who had dominated the heavens and earth, who had been so crazy and had condensed his own miracle, was actually still a child. Looking at the affectionate mother and son, Lu Tao gently shook his head and said slowly, "Chunwei, now is not the time to talk to Xiaofeng. There are some people that we should also take care of." The moment she heard this, Yan Chunwei's previously fragile expression completely disappeared. At this moment, a deep murderous intent slowly appeared in her eyes, about to overflow in an instant. Looking at this scene, Lu Feng only looked at the two of them in confusion. Lu Tao smiled slowly and said, "Xiaofeng, you have done well. As for the rest, it's up to your parents. What happened to me in the past, I will definitely not let it happen to you again." After saying this, Lu Tao suddenly turned his head and looked in the direction of the void. He said loudly, "Patriarch, I will leave this place to you. You must pay attention to Xiaofeng's safety. Leave the rest to the two of us." Hearing this, a figure slowly appeared. Lu Feng recognized that this was the Lu family's patriarch, who had previously helped him arrange everything and stayed in the massacre abyss. When he heard Lu Tao's words, the Lu family's patriarch nodded gently and said, "Lu Tao, don't worry and go. This is the Massacre Star, a territory controlled by the gods of the human race. They have no right to be impudent here." Lu Tao smiled and nodded, then looked at Yan Chunwei. "Chunwei, it seems that we have not made a move for 20 years, causing these people to forget the terror of the Slayer God and Goddess Wei." Yan Chunwei smiled coldly. At this moment, she was no longer the warm and loving Mother Lu of the past. Instead, she had returned to being the Goddess Wei who had slaughtered millions of people. In an instant, the two of them disappeared completely. As he watched them leave, Lu Feng frowned slightly. He looked at the Lu family's patriarch and asked, "Patriarch, where did my parents go?" When he heard Lu Feng's question, the Lu family's patriarch smiled gently. He looked at Lu Feng with an unconcealable satisfaction in his eyes. He had originally thought that Lu Feng should have the strength of the Massacre Emperor. After all, he had the strongest human monarch bloodline, which was enough to become the Massacre Emperor. Moreover, Lu Feng had barely stayed in the Lu family for more than a few days. It could be said that he had started too late. But who would have thought that Lu Feng's stunning and exceptional talent would reach such a level? The appearance of the primordial Great Fiend at the last moment had shocked him. This was Lu Feng's trump card. It was the most powerful trump card that other people with the human monarch bloodline did not possess. This also allowed Lu Feng to enter the domain of the Massacre Emperor, although he did not participate in the qualification battle. Currently, Lu Feng was qualified to be conferred the title of Imperial Monarch. Looking at Lu Feng, the Lu family's patriarch shook his head lightly and said, "They're just a bunch of clowns. They're not worth mentioning. Your parents are just going to teach them a lesson." When Lu Feng heard this, he did not say anything. Instead, he looked at the sky with a peculiar expression. At this moment, more than 100 spatial rifts appeared in the outer reaches of the great Yen galaxy. These were the signs of deities. It was one of the signs of them traveling through time and space. However, out of the hundreds of figures that had descended, not a single one of them was an ordinary god spirit. At this moment, The weakest of those who could and dared to descend were terrifying true immortals. Looking at the 70 or so true immortals and heavenly gods before them, the 10 heavenly gods and true immortals from the Lu family smiled coldly. The Lu family's heavenly god, who was clearly the most powerful among them, walked out slowly. Endless laws swirled around him, and a boundless sea of stars appeared behind him. With just a light step, he crossed a distance of 10,000 miles. His voice was extremely distant, as though it could pierce through time and space. The Nether tribe, the Celestial tribe, the Serene Blood tribe, very good. This time, for the sake of the Lu family's bloodline, the 3 great tribes of the Overgods Alliance have all come together. Not bad, not bad, not bad at all. In order to fight against the human race and the War Gods Alliance, the Nether tribe, the Serene Blood tribe, and the Celestial tribe, these 3 peak overlords had formed an organization as well. It was the Overgods Alliance. Now, for the sake of Lu Feng's existence, these 3 peak tribes had all come together. Upon hearing the mocking words of the Lu family's heavenly god, a terrifying Nether tribe existence who was also a heavenly god walked out slowly. He used the same words to shatter the voice of the Lu family's heavenly god. It's enough that the Lu family has one godslayer. Do you think the human race is still the human race from the era of the human monarchs? Do you think the Lu family is the same as the Deshirtian's bloodline of the emperors? Without the divine king, even if the Lu family has an alien paragon, it's useless. This time, Lu Feng must die. Chapter 209. As soon as they finished speaking, more than 70 celestial gods and true gods took a light step forward and crossed an infinite distance. Every single one of them was an invincible and noble existence. Any one of them could change the heavens and earth. If they went all out, they could even completely shatter a small galaxy. The combination of more than 70 celestial gods and true gods could even cripple a first-rate clan. But now, for Lu Feng's sake, they were all here. Vaguely, the strongest wills began to boil, as if an endless battle would erupt in the next moment. However, at this critical juncture, a spatial crack appeared. 2 figures slowly walked out, carrying with them boundless killing intent and condensed terrifying wills. They were Lu Tao and his wife, who had rushed over from the land of massacre. The moment they saw Lu Tao appear, the expressions of more than 70 celestial gods and true gods changed drastically. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. Lu Tao had used endless blood and killing to accumulate his invincible reputation. He had almost crippled the entire younger generation of the universe. This was an unparalleled reputation, and Lu Tao was definitely a terrifying existence who could endlessly challenge those of a higher realm. Celestial God Realm, a heavenly god from the celestial race, saw through Lu Tao's cultivation level, and his expression changed drastically. Lu Tao, who was at the true God Realm, could already kill a celestial god. At that time, he had not even unleashed the power of the Lu family's bloodline. Now that he had stepped into the celestial god realm, everyone could imagine that unless it was a peak celestial god, no one could stop Lu Tao. And once Lu Tao awakened the power of his bloodline, perhaps only a king realm almighty would be able to take action. Otherwise, no one would be a match for Lu Tao. Just now, who was the one who said that my son would definitely die? Lu Tao's words were like the voice of the underworld, reverberating throughout the entire universe, causing everyone's hearts to tremble. In the next moment, a ray of light appeared behind Lu Feng. A terrifying presence of slaughter spread out, and in an instant, a sword of slaughter that was several 100 million kilometers long appeared out of thin air. God-slaying martial Dao incarnation. God-slaying sword. Without the slightest hesitation, Lu Tao immediately used his martial way avatar, the God-slayer's sword. At this moment, the 9th grade martial path incarnation of the God-slaying sword radiated a murderous light in the void. None of the 70-odd true gods or heavenly gods dared to take a step forward. Everyone understood that Lu Tao, with the God-Slayer in hand and his bloodline fully activated, was definitely an existence that made billions of living beings tremble in fear. His sword had been dyed with the blood of countless geniuses and gods. As long as he wanted to, there was no way these 70-plus true gods or heavenly gods would be able to stop him. Lu Tao, I know that once you use all of your power, you'll most likely be able to kill over 20 true gods and Empyrean gods before we can kill Lu Feng. However, in the end, you won't be able to stop us. Hearing this, the heavenly gods of the Lu family laughed. It was a terrifying laughter that shook the entire starry sky. Lu Tao alone is enough to severely injure all of you. His strength alone is enough to stop over 20 true gods and Empyrean gods. What if you add us to the mix? I forgot to tell you that the 10 ancestors of the Lu family are all direct descendants of the Lu family. We all have the complete bloodline of the human monarch. The 70-plus true gods and Empyrean gods all took a step back the moment they heard this. Their expressions were filled with unconcealable fear. Why had so many existences come here? They had come to kill Lu Feng. Why did they want to kill Lu Feng? It was because Lu Feng was the king of slaughter. He had the complete bloodline of the human monarch. Everyone knew how terrifying the bloodline of the human monarch was. It was almost comparable to the amplification of a psyche master's power. The complete bloodline of the human monarch of the true God realm, once its combat power was fully unleashed, even ordinary heavenly gods would not be able to resist. And the complete bloodline of the human monarch of the heavenly god realm was equivalent to the peak of the heavenly gods. Among the 10 ancestors of the Lu family, there were 4 Empyrean gods and 6 true gods. In other words, Lu Tao was an existence equivalent to the virtual king. The 11 people of the Lu family were equivalent to 1 virtual king, 4 peak Empyrean gods, and 6 Empyrean gods. This kind of combat power could almost rival them. You all seem to have forgotten about me. Yan Chenwei's voice rang out at the right time. At this moment, everyone finally noticed her presence. Emperor Wei, she was one of the peak emperors of the human race's golden generation, a peerless monster. Although she was not a peerless monster, her level of terror was not far off. Everyone understood that although there were only 5 emperors of the human race's golden generation in the past, any one of them was a true supreme terror in the past era. They were all terrifying powerhouses who could suppress the geniuses of billions of races. And among them, Emperor Wei was one of the peak existences. Although I'm only at the peak of the true God realm, it's not a problem for me to fight or even kill a high-level Empyrean god. I can even fight a peak Empyrean god. How many peak Empyrean gods are there among you? There were more than 70 true gods and Empyrean gods, and 20 of them were Empyrean gods. But among these 20 Empyrean gods, only 7 were peak Empyrean gods. Of the 7 peak Empyrean gods, 5 of them would have to deal with the 10 ancestors of the Lu family and Emperor Wei. The remaining Empyrean gods and true gods might be able to severely injure or even kill the remaining ancestors of the Lu family, but they did not forget one thing. That was the God-Slayer Lu Tao. Although the God-Slayer was only a Empyrean god, his existence was equivalent to more than 10 peak Empyrean gods. Once he went berserk, he would be able to suppress 2 peak Empyrean gods in an instant without caring about any casualties. The remaining ordinary Empyrean gods and true gods were no threat to the God-Slayer. It could be said that, although they had the upper hand in terms of overall strength, but if they really fought, the outcome would probably be reversed. After weighing the combat power of both sides, the Empyrean gods and master gods who should have retreated suddenly burst into laughter. It was a kind of endless and crazy laughter. Good, good, good! As expected of the most talented God-Slayer in the past 500 years. Back then, our ancestor of the Netherworld clan, the Netherworld King, personally destroyed your path to becoming the Divine King. It was indeed a very correct decision. If the ones who have come here today are really only these people, then as you think, everything will come to a sad end. But this time, we're not here with these people. The real combat power is not us. Welcome, Ancestor, Ancestor! This Empyrean god of the Netherworld clan actually said that he was welcoming the Ancestor. He was already in the realm of a peak Empyrean god, and there was only one possibility for him to address the Ancestor as such, the Virtual King. This time, in order to kill Lu Feng, the Master Gods had even mobilized the Virtual King Ancestor, a powerful existence at the level of a universe overlord. Gradually, the void became chaotic, and heaven and earth became nothingness. The trajectories of countless stars were changed. A kind of shocking elephant was born. Many beings appeared one after another. This was a kind of etiquette, the highest kind of etiquette in time and space and the universe for the arrival of a king. Legend had it that the Divine King had arrived at a part of the starry sky. Then, the entire starry sky would be filled with shocking phenomena. Even the illusory figures of the ancient saints would appear in the world and pay their respects. This was the invincible majesty of a king. Finally, as a kind of terrifying aura spread, 3 figures slowly walked out of the chaos. Endless laws retreated, millions of stars resonated, time and space rotated, and time was paying tribute to him. That was the king, the overlord of the universe, the virtual king. The king had arrived, whether it was the 10 ancestors of the Lu family, or Godslayer Lu Tao, Emperor Wei, or Yen Qinwei. Their expressions were unusually ugly at this moment. They could sense that the 3 virtual kings who had arrived were only virtual kings at the first level of the virtual king realm. However, a virtual king was a virtual king. Even 10 pinnacle celestial gods were no match for a virtual king at the first level of the origin realm. This was a kind of fundamental difference. The difference between the two was too great. The 3 virtual kings of the origin realm stood in front of everyone like an eternal barrier, making everyone feel despair and tremble. One of the virtual kings looked at Lu Tao with a strange expression. Finally, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Godslayer Lu Tao, you are indeed worthy of being an extreme genius who is qualified to challenge the Divine King. I can sense the terrifying power in your body. Perhaps I alone am no match for you. However, if I want to hold you back, it won't be difficult at all. I have 3 virtual kings of the origin realm here. If one of them can hold you back, the remaining 2 can easily destroy everyone here. Do you have any other ideas? Was there really no other way?" At this moment, Lu Tao's eyes were scarlet red. He really had no other ideas. Indeed, he was now between the virtual king of the origin realm and the virtual king of the origin realm. He could defeat an origin realm virtual king, but it would take a lot of time. Even if he used supreme techniques, it wouldn't be enough to deal with it in a very short time. Moreover, once he used Supreme Dharma King's arrival, he would completely lose his ability to fight after killing an origin realm virtual king. At that time, there would be no other way. Lu Tao was silent. He really didn't have any other ideas. However, at this moment, the God-Slayer was already shaking to its limit. Lu Tao had already answered. Although there was no other way, he still wanted to fight. This was because he couldn't back down in this battle. This place was his precious guardian. Even if he died, he wouldn't take a single step back. At this moment, the true gods and sky gods of the Master God Alliance revealed sinister smiles. They knew that the arrival of the 3 virtual kings of the underworld meant that everything was set in stone. There wouldn't be any more variables. The virtual king of the underworld slowly raised his arm. In the next moment, he was about to unleash his most powerful attack. However, something unexpected happened again. This time, the unexpected appearance shocked everyone and made them completely silent. Chapter 210. Space Storm, the Nether Tribe's virtual king patriarch, spat out these words when he sensed the endless chaos in the void. At this moment, those who were present were the mainstays of the various large clans. Naturally, they understood the significance of the spatial storm. In the entire universe, there was only one kind of existence that could travel through time and space like this. That was a psychic. Only a psychic could use the space storm to travel through the universe. There was no exception to this. Even those psychic existences could not do it. Psychic only existed in the human tribes federation. Everyone knew how terrifying a psychic was. They had more or less battled with a psychic before. Psychic masters represented unparalleled combat power. Slowly, 3 extremely old existences walked out of the space storm. At this moment, the true gods and heavenly gods of the Lord God Alliance turned pale. Even the 3 Nether Tribes' virtual king patriarchs looked extremely gloomy. This was because they realized that the 3 psychic masters who had descended were actually heavenly masters. 3 human heavenly masters. This was truly incomparably terrifying. Heavenly masters were synonymous with terror. Legend had it that the Void Emperor could fight against Supremes and was in existence at the level of the heterodox Supremes. Heavenly Masters could fight against the Virtual King. Although these 3 Heavenly Masters were at the lowest level of existence, any one of them who walked out was equivalent to or even surpassed the Virtual King of the Origin Realm. The 3 of them were almost equivalent to 4 Virtual Kings of the Origin Realm. However, this was not the end. With the arrival of the 3 Heavenly Masters, countless energy fluctuations appeared in the void again. In an instant, more than 40 figures slowly walked out of the void. Looking at everything in front of him, one of the existences who walked out of the void exclaimed softly and said slowly, "It seems that we are not late. The battle hasn't started yet." Hearing this voice, the 3 Nether Tribes' patriarchs' expressions changed again. They gritted their teeth and said the name of the owner of the voice, Heavenly King Hun. He was a virtual king of the Human Federation government, a virtual king stage 2 existence, Heavenly King Hun. When Heavenly King Hun heard someone calling out his name, he turned to look at the person who spoke. At this moment, a playful look appeared on his face. "Lord Dongyuan, Lord Haichun, Lord Haichun, I didn't expect it to be you 3 shameless old things." Shameless old thing. The existence of the virtual king was extremely noble. Even though he was only a virtual king of the Origin Realm, he was still powerful enough to rule over a region and be considered a universe overlord at the level of a supreme being. However, Heavenly King Hun was calling him shameless. In the face of Heavenly King Hun's provocation, the 3 Nether Virtual King Patriarchs fell silent. They had fought Heavenly King Hun for countless years, and in terms of eloquence, even 10 of them were no match for him. Also, Heavenly King Hun was an overlord in the initial phase of the Virtual King's 2nd level. The strength of one person was enough to easily defeat and suppress the 3 of them. Therefore, the 3 Virtual King Patriarchs of the Nether race didn't say anything. Heavenly King Hun arrived. Lu Tao bowed slightly and shouted, "Greetings, Senior Heavenly King Hun." Heavenly King Hun looked at Lu Tao, nodded slightly, and said, "Lu Tao, it was the ancestor of the Nether race, the Divine King, who broke your path to becoming a king. We couldn't do anything in that area. However, this kind of situation won't happen a second time. You can rest assured that your son, Lu Feng, is under our protection. If anyone wants to deal with him, we humans will show everyone the foundation of the strongest race in the past." Lu Tao nodded respectfully. Although he was no longer afraid of Heavenly King Hun, who was in the initial phase of the 2nd level of the Virtual King's 2nd level, when he used all his combat power. However, Lu Tao still maintained the respect he deserved. This was because Heavenly King Hun had once helped Lu Tao. Although the human race was only one race at the moment, the number of powerhouses that had arrived here was still less than the number of powerhouses of the Master God Alliance. However, the reality would no longer be the case once the war started. Heavenly King Hun alone was enough to involve and even suppress the 3 virtual king patriarchs of the Nether race. On the other hand, the 3 heavenly masters of the Federal University and Lu Tao could easily wipe out all the true gods and heavenly gods of the Nether race. Apart from them, the 10 ancestors of the Lu family and the other powerhouses of the human race that had come this time were definitely not to be trifled with either. It could be said that their advantage in numbers had been reduced to nothing in an instant. The virtual king patriarch of the Nether race sighed deeply with a gloomy expression. He had originally thought that the appearance of the 3 virtual king patriarchs would be enough to decide everything. After all, they were only going to deal with a high-level warrior. The human race might not be the only race in the massacre abyss, but also the war god race. However, those lords also understood that the war god race would most likely not lend a hand in eradicating Lu Feng. After all, Lu Feng was a threat to all races apart from the human race. It was precisely because they had considered all these aspects that they had dared to descend here without any scruples and swear to kill Lu Feng. However, who would have thought that the Federation would value Lu Feng to such an extreme degree? Even the famous Heavenly King Hun, who had been in the foreign battlefields, had come here. The Federal University, which had never made a move before, had also sent 3 heavenly masters. There was no longer any need for this battle to take place. Consider yourselves lucky this time. However, I have to remind you that Lu Feng is someone we must kill. Even if we don't have the opportunity now, he will still fall in the end. After saying that, the 3 virtual king patriarchs of the underworld race returned to the chaos and completely returned to nothingness. Many beings fell silent when they saw this. Finally, they turned around, tore through the endless void, and were about to leave. However, the moment they left, a brilliant radiance appeared in the sky. That was the supreme slaughter of number 1 high school's lawless Tao. It shook the galaxy, shattered all time, and created an eternal dusk. The God Slayer. Many beings only saw the last flicker of the endless brilliance before they could see anything else. These beings were all powerful enough to become overlords of a part of the universe. Although the flicker of this brilliance made people's hearts palpitate, they all came back to their senses in an instant. Everyone's eyes flickered with incomparable shock as they looked at everything in front of them. 1 sword, 1 god in a daze, these people seemed to recall the past, when the god-slayer Lu Tao had run amok and killed the younger generation of the universe. At the time, the god-slayer had been the most famous, shocking, and terrifying god-slayer. The god-slayer was the legendary 1 sword, 1 god. However, it was different from those monstrous geniuses who had fallen under the god-slayer. This time, the one who had fallen was a godlike being from a small race. He was a heavenly god. Peak heavenly god, 1 sword, massacre, Lu Tao said slowly as he looked coldly at the heavenly gods and true gods, whose faces were filled with fear and indignation. Lu Feng is my son. Whoever wants to kill him, I'll kill that person. At this moment, many beings of the Master God's alliance came to their senses. They seemed to have recalled what this peak heavenly god had said before. He had said that he would kill Lu Feng this time. However, now it seemed that his fall was caused by that sentence. At this moment, whether it was the heavenly gods and true gods of the Master God's alliance or the terrifying experts of the human race, they all looked at Lu Tao with strange expressions. Lu Tao was domineering. They had either seen it or heard it from others. However, these people had not expected Lu Tao to be so domineering. In fact, what frightened these beings the most was Lu Tao's strength. One had to know that the one who had been killed by Lu Tao with 1 sword. He was not one of those monstrous geniuses who had fallen under his sword. Although those geniuses had a bright future, they had only been ordinary experts when they died. The strongest among them had not surpassed the true god level. At this moment, The one who had been killed by Lu Tao with one sword was a true heavenly god, a peak heavenly god. Such an existence was an absolute overlord in the universe. However, he had been killed by Lu Tao, who was also a heavenly god, with one sword. Horrifying, horrifying, truly horrifying. God Slayer, the most talented person in 500 years. The most monstrous genius in the history of the Lu family's bloodline. He was once hailed as the ultimate monstrous genius who would revive the era of the human monarch. This is the true God Slayer. After 20 years of silence, everyone had gradually forgotten Lu Tao's terror and the origin of the taboo name, God Slayer. Now Lu Tao had returned, because his son, God Slayer, was about to embark on a bloody path of slaughter again. Finally, all the beings from the Alliance of Gods left. They didn't dare to have any complaints about Lu Tao's massacre. The sword just now had already demonstrated Lu Tao's ferocity. These people understood that although they had more than 70 true gods and heavenly gods, they still had no power to resist Lu Tao without the involvement of a peak expert. Moreover, there were many beings from the human clan on the side. With their combined strength, it would not be difficult for them to kill more than 70 heavenly gods and true gods. Finally, everyone disappeared completely. At this moment, Lu Tao breathed a sigh of relief imperceptibly. He turned around, looked at the human experts who had rushed over, and bowed respectfully. In terms of strength, Lu Tao could be ranked second, just below Heavenly King Hun. However, in terms of age, everyone here was old enough to be his ancestors. Moreover, without them, just the 10 ancestors of the Lu family alone would not be enough to protect Lu Feng. Although they did not make a move, this kindness could not be forgotten or ignored. Thank you, seniors. I, Lu Tao, will remember your kindness. Hearing this, many of the Federation's experts smiled and nodded. Now, he had the protection of many powerhouses of the human race. Even the Federal University, an organization that had never made a move before, had arrived. It could be seen that although Lu Feng's future couldn't be said to be completely worry-free, those powerful existences wouldn't easily make a move. Many beings believed that as long as those absolutely terrifying beings did not make a move, Lu Feng would definitely be able to grow. After all, Lu Feng was a king, the supreme emperor among the young supreme beings. Chapter 211. A family with 2 kings, and these 2 were father and son. To be able to receive benefits and kindness from Lu Tao was definitely a pleasant surprise for them. Heavenly King Hun looked at Lu Tao, nodded slightly, and said, Lu Tao, I don't have to worry about you. Remember, Lu Feng is not only a genius of the Lu family, but also a treasure of the human race of the Federation. Contact the Federation government if there's any problem you can't handle. We won't hesitate to help. Heavenly King Hun turned around and disappeared. Following closely behind, many powerhouses of the Federal University also left slowly. The space-time storm appeared again, and the 3 heavenly masters of the Federal University turned around and left. They had never said a word when they came here, and they did not even ask for anything. They left just like that after everything was done. This kind of elegance was really unique to Psychic. Seeing the space-time storm disappear, a smile appeared on Lu Tao's face again. He looked at Yan Chenwei beside him and said casually, It seems that sending Xiaofeng to the Federal University was the right choice. When I was attacked, I didn't see a single heavenly master from the Federal University make a move. Yan Chenwei also smiled and nodded when she heard this. Senior, they've all left. Let's go too. In the endless void, 2 Tiantian stood quietly and watched everything happen without making a move. The 5 arbiters of the massacre abyss beside him benefited from 2 Tiantian's terror and were completely hidden. However, it was this secrecy that made 2 Tiantian even more terrifying in their eyes. After all, the existence in the field was Heavenly King Hun, who had the virtual king level 2 initial stage. If one wanted to stand in the surrounding void and deceive a level 2 virtual king, one would need to be at least level 3, or even level 4 virtual king. However, the slaughtering heaven god beside them was merely an illusion. These arbitrators found it hard to imagine how terrifying Tu Tianxian would be if he were to descend in his true form. I'm afraid his real body has already broken through the level 5 virtual king. Thinking of this, many existences broke out in cold sweat. The virtual king at level 5 was comparable to the level of the peerless overlords at the beginning of the civilization of this era. Li Tianlai's inheritance came from the Dongru Great Emperor. As for the Dongru Great Emperor, he was only a stage 6 virtual king. Towards Tu Tianxian, these people were already terrified from the bottom of their hearts. They stood there quietly, not daring to go against Slaughter God's will. At this moment, many existences looked at the departure of those heavenly gods and true gods and felt a strange feeling in their hearts. After all, they were here to kill Lu Feng. And looking at the attitude of this terrifying slaughtering heaven deity, Lu Feng was the disciple he was proud of. How could he allow such a disciple to be killed? These arbitrators did not dare to make a sound and did not dare to interfere with Slaughter God's will. Finally, when the last few true gods had left, Slaughter God smiled slowly. Let's go. They came to kill my disciple. If I just leave like this, then do I still need to exist? The killing intent was cold and almost condensed into a substance. This was the massacre abyss, and these arbitrators were all arbitrators who had grown up in the massacre abyss. They were all terrifying existences who had condensed countless killing paths. But at this moment, they, who had grown up in killing, were actually endlessly frightened by the killing intent that Slaughter God had revealed. This was almost inconceivable. These people still did not dare to speak. This was because they could see that Slaughter God had already unleashed his supreme killing intent. At this time, if they made Slaughter God unhappy, then they might be in danger of dying at any time. However, these people were thinking slightly, because so far those people had already entered the spacetime travel. At this time, in the spacetime travel, unless one's strength was absolutely overwhelming, it was impossible to kill at all. Moreover, they had been away for so long. Finally, just when they were at a loss, Slaughter God proved. He finally proved to the 5 arbitrators what his so-called punishment was. God, slaughter, from his mouth, he gently spat out 2 words. In an instant, a feeling of complete space-time displacement came. It made them seem to have passed through the torrent of space-time, passing through the restrictions of all regions. In the next moment, an arm stretched out and entered the space-time. At this moment, the arm was infinitely enlarged, and it actually gave people a feeling that it was as huge as a galaxy. It was like an arm of a galaxy. A level 5 virtual king could easily shatter a second-level galaxy, but they relied on their absolute strength to do so. For Slaughter God to be able to transform an arm of a galaxy level, this was something they did not even dare to think about before. The appearance of the arm completely ignored the cutting of the torrent in the spacetime. And this scene made the 5 arbitrators understand that the arm that Slaughter God transformed had absolutely terrifying strength. It wouldn't be like those illusions that only had a huge body but no power. Die. In the next moment, a bright light appeared in his eyes, penetrating the barrier of billions of galaxies. And as this giant arm fell, in an instant there was a fluctuation in space-time that shook everything. The 5 arbitrators were dumbfounded, because everything that happened in front of them was simply unbelievable. Under this arm, the more than 70 celestial gods and true gods who had left previously did not have the slightest ability to resist and were instantly crushed into endless nothingness. The 5 arbitrators were completely stunned. They simply could not imagine that there was such a terrifying attack. One attack to kill more than 70 celestial gods and true gods. Such strength had at least reached the level of a level 2 virtual king. And if it was so casual, then it was at least a level 3 virtual king. But don't forget that Slaughter God's attack was done in the torrent of spacetime. Such strength, such terror, could only be achieved by at least a level 4 virtual king. In other words, Slaughter God's attack just now proved the existence of this illusion. It was at least as terrifying as a level 4 virtual king. Is his real body really just a level 5 virtual king? A level 5 virtual king? What a joke, what a joke! This was the biggest joke in the world. The avatar of a level 5 virtual king was, at most, at the level of a level 3 virtual king. To reach the level of a level 4 virtual king, this proved that the strength of Slaughter God's real body was at least a level 6 pinnacle. A level 6 pinnacle virtual king. This is completely comparable to the most primitive primordial era of this era, those true super-universe overlords. One attack to kill more than 70 celestial gods and true gods, but Slaughter God's aura did not diminish at all. Instead, it increased even more terrifyingly. In an instant, it had already surpassed the peak state of the past. The 5 arbitrators did not understand why this invincible existence was still doing this when everything had already ended. But the next moment they seemed to have thought of something. Fear appeared in his eyes once again. Finally, as Slaughter God waved his left and right gently, the fear in their hearts was finally confirmed. His left hand waved, and in an instant, it cut through the void and broke open the chaos. And in front of them, 3 figures appeared. If it had been in the past, they would not have recognized these 3 figures. But now, after experiencing what had just happened, they already knew who they were. East Garden King, Tortoise King, and Ocean Forest King. 3 level 1 virtual king great beings of the underworld race. As if they had sensed the existence of Slaughter God, the 3 virtual king great beings of the underworld race sped up countless times, and they began to flee with all their might. Vaguely, the 5 arbitrators seemed to have sensed the true meaning of death. They knew that it was the holy land of the underworld race, the underworld. They were about to return to the underworld. At this moment, a terrifying and invincible will suddenly spread out from the underworld. It was a kind of terrifying aura that looked down on billions of living beings, a kind of annihilating all concept. That is, an overlord in the underworld. The ancient beings of the underworld race also sensed the existence of Slaughter God's will through the chaos. They had woken up and were about to strike. But Slaughter God completely turned a blind eye to all of this. His fist, across the ancient chaos, struck in an instant. The chaos, the laws, and the mysteries all turned into nothingness in an instant. This was an extremely violent punch, the ultimate punch that could annihilate all living beings. The power of this punch far surpassed the power of the previous giant hand that was like a galaxy. The void shattered. The chaos turned into nothingness. With this punch, the invincible power of the underworld was only slightly blocked before it was smashed into nothingness in an instant. In the next moment, just as the 3 virtual king were excited and were about to return to the underworld, they disappeared. You have provoked the dignity of the underworld race and angered the anger of the true underworld king. You have to pay the price no matter where you go. The voice slowly spread out from the underworld, as if a supreme emperor had descended to the mortal world, majestic as the sky. However, in the face of this voice, Slaughter God only frowned slightly, and his expression was one of complete disdain. Who do you think you are? How dare you call me you and call yourself I? I'm waiting for your arrival. I'm waiting for the appearance of the anger of the underworld race. The hatred of the past will be settled one day. This day won't be long. It won't be long before there will be an end. In front of him, the chaos began to dissipate slowly, and all the scenes were disappearing. In an instant, everything returned to the previously tranquil and endless void. After taking one last look at them, Slaughter God's figure gradually changed and finally disappeared completely. It wasn't until Slaughter God had completely left that the 5 arbitrators finally reacted. They faced each other, and their eyes were filled with a dazed expression. Why? It was because the virtual king that woke up in the underworld was titled the true underworld king. They had never heard of the true underworld king's title. However, they knew what kind of existence a king with the word underworld in the underworld race was. Among the underworld race, there is the virtual king of the underworld titled ship. All of them are existences comparable to the super-universe overlords of the ancient era. They are at least 6th-layer origin king realm existences. But just now, Slaughter God shattered the supreme attack of the true underworld king. Although he has just awakened, the supreme attack of the true underworld king definitely belongs to at least level 5 virtual king. To be able to shatter the attack of a level 5 virtual king, and even kill the 3 virtual kings outside the chaos of time and space. Such power, at least level 5 pinnacle virtual king. Investigate. 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 Think of all ways and use all the information network of the god. We must find out the identity of this Slaughter God. He is too terrifying, too terrifying. A virtual king that is at least level 7 pinnacle. How can we not know? An arbitrator roared. He had already forgotten everything. He had forgotten whether or not Tu Tianshan had really left. As an existence of the heavenly god realm, he had almost lost his mind due to the terror of Slaughter God. The other 4 arbitrators were not much better. They had all gone crazy. They walked out of the endless void and gathered toward the largest massacre star in the center. They must find out the true identity of Slaughter God. The entire Yashi massacre land was in an uproar. The 5 super massacre stars were in an uproar. The entire massacre abyss was in an uproar. The birth of the Emperor of Massacre was not a big deal. Every year, different Emperors of Massacre would be born. And in those years where geniuses were born, there would be 3 or even 4 Emperors of Massacre every year. Originally, this time, Lu Feng was titled the Emperor of Massacre. It was not a big deal. After all, Lu Feng was only an advanced warrior, the Emperor of Slaughter. However, when Lu Feng's performance on the battlefield was praised, everything was completely different. Emperor. This Lu Feng is actually a titled emperor. Among the various emperors, the supreme emperor. He is really arrogant. However, the Massacre Abyss actually gave him such a title. Those emperors of Massacre actually recognized Lu Feng as an emperor, a son of Massacre who had heard of the legend mock. However, what awaited him was not the response of the surrounding crowd, but endless mocking gazes. If he is not attacking the Emperor of Massacre, if the Massacre Abyss does not have a rule, then the title that Lu Feng of the Human King bloodline has obtained should be Emperor. It is universally acknowledged that he already has the strength of a supreme emperor among the supreme beings. He is already the existence of the King of Massacre. Such an extreme monstrous talent, what is wrong with being a titled emperor? Chapter 212. The entire land of Massacre started to discuss this matter, as did the billions of other races in the universe. They marveled at the rise of the human race, and were shocked by the terrifying splendor of the Lu family. Apart from the human race, almost everyone in the entire universe felt the same way. However, due to some strange orders, only the human race didn't have any news about Lu Feng circulating. Even the core of the Sky Network only mentioned him briefly. What was written here was merely a shocking extreme monstrous talent of the human race, a titled emperor. Of course, Lu Feng didn't know about all this. Even if he did, he wouldn't have cared. He had once experienced being weak and small. Although he liked these so-called flashy and empty titles, he didn't care much about them. Furthermore, Lu Feng was currently beside his parents, enjoying a rare moment of peace. "Dad, you said that I can already condense a martial path embodiment?" Lu Feng's eyes glowed with an indescribable excitement. Anyone could condense a martial path embodiment as long as they entered the martialist boundary. A martial path embodiment was an unimaginable temptation for all martialists. After all, a martial path embodiment represented an extremely powerful enhancement. During a battle, it could even surpass the strongest enhancement of one's cultivation technique and body. Furthermore, the assistance brought about by a martial path embodiment wasn't something that could be fully expressed through mere enhancement. Looking at Lu Feng's anxious look, Lu Tao's eyes flashed with a smug smile. Sometimes, he really felt helpless when it came to this son of his. Ever since he had been young, even Lu Feng had felt helpless when he didn't have the slightest bit of talent. At the time, Lu Feng had been very self-reliant. Even though he had the power to shake the galaxy and was known as the most talented martialist in the past 500 years, he still felt helpless when it came to Lu Feng. Now, a mere martial path embodiment had actually made Lu Feng reveal such an expression. This made Lu Tao finally feel a sense of pride as a father. He didn't say it immediately. Instead, he muttered to himself as if he wanted to display his authority as a father. However, at this moment, a voice rang out, causing Lu Tao's smug expression to crumble. "Xiaofeng, don't ask your dad. He's putting on airs. Mama will tell you these things." If someone else had interrupted him, Lu Tao would have definitely let that person know the horror of killing a god. However, the person who interrupted him was Yan Chenwei. This made Lu Tao feel helpless. In the entire universe, there might be many people who could kill Lu Tao, but there were only two people who could make him feel helpless. They were Lu Feng and Yan Chenwei. One was his proudest son, and the other was his most beloved wife. Just this point alone made Lu Tao feel very helpless. Looking at Yan Chenwei's smug expression, Lu Tao still wanted to say something. However, when he saw Yan Chenwei's slightly threatening gaze, he could only shrug helplessly and say, "Xiaofeng, listen to your mother then." After saying this, he could only stand aside and sulk. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng didn't reveal any strange expression. Perhaps Lu Tao was a god-slayer outside, the king of massacre who was stained with the blood of countless monsters and geniuses. However, at home, he had the least status. Lu Feng focused his gaze on Yan Chenwei. Yan Chenwei didn't hold back like Lu Tao and directly told Lu Feng. Martial path embodiment is one of the most important enhancements to a warrior's combat power. It is also indispensable on the path of a warrior to become a powerhouse. Xiaofeng, do you know the origin of the appearance of martial path embodiment? In fact, Lu Feng already had some understanding of the origin of the appearance of martial path embodiment. Previously, when he was fighting with Tu Tianxin had given Lu Feng a systematic explanation. However, he didn't tell Lu Feng the method of condensing martial path embodiment. Lu Feng originally wanted to say that he knew, but when he saw his mother's eager gaze, Lu Feng shook his head decisively. Sure enough, when she saw that Lu Feng didn't know, Yan Chenwei's eyes revealed a trace of smugness. She didn't hesitate at all and continued, "When a warrior enters the realm of a warrior, besides being able to comprehend the power of heaven and earth, the biggest change is that a warrior can use inner vision. A warrior's inner vision is different from a psychic master's inner vision. They enter their own spiritual sea directly. However, a warrior's inner vision is to open up our own spiritual sea." Spiritual sea. Lu Feng had also been shocked when he heard Tu Tianxin talk about the spiritual sea. After all, he had already opened up his own spiritual sea before he was a beginner warrior. In his spiritual sea, the biggest secret of his life was hidden: sky-piercing futu. Sky-piercing futu was too mysterious, terrifying, and extreme. Lu Feng had only entered the first level, but he had already obtained the Great Demon True Body and the Primordial Scripture. These two supreme techniques were not inferior to the Human King Scripture. It was by relying on these two supreme techniques that he had been able to reach his current realm, be strong, and destroy everything. When he first heard about the spiritual sea, Lu Feng also wanted to enter it to see the current state of his spiritual sea. However, Tu Tianxin's next battle disrupted Lu Feng's plan. Therefore, until now, Lu Feng had never entered the spiritual sea to see the mysterious sky-piercing Futu. The opening of the spiritual sea is the root of the formation of the martial path incarnation. As you enter the martial path, the spiritual sea will be opened up directly. As long as you sink your mind into it, you will be able to enter it, and the martial path incarnation is closely related to the spiritual sea. At this point, Lu Feng's mind began to concentrate. Because these were things that Tu Tianxin had never mentioned before. Lu Feng knew that whether he could condense the martial path incarnation would depend on this moment. Actually, the martial path incarnation is not naturally formed. It is given by heaven and earth. Lu Feng also agreed with this point. After all, many martial path incarnations were strange. If they were given by heaven, it would be difficult to explain. It should be known that many martial path incarnations were truly in various technological forms. These were all formed later and did not exist innately. The martial path incarnation is to rely on one's imagination to condense a virtual shadow in one's own spiritual sea and finally summon it out. This is the source of the martial path incarnation and also the method of condensing it. Looking at Lu Feng's contemplative look, Yan Chenwei did not interrupt. After a long time, Lu Feng seemed to finally understand. He nodded his head lightly. At this time, Lu Tao, who had not interrupted until now, finally spoke. Xiaofeng, the martial path incarnation is strange. The same is true for the shape that it condenses into. However, different martial path incarnations bring different effects. In the universe, there are only 3 forms that are recognized as the most powerful martial path incarnation. The first one is the human form. For example, the Divine King at the beginning of this era, Heavenly Lord Netherworld, his martial path incarnation was the human form. It was condensed based on the immortals and demons of the immortal and demon era. His martial path incarnation was the immortal and demon god. Needless to say, the terror of the immortal and demon god was unparalleled. After Heavenly Lord Netherworld entered the second tier of the Divine King's mythological domain, his martial path incarnation almost had an independent will. As for the degree of strength, it was only slightly weaker than the original by a sliver. It was almost between the first tier of the Divine King's mythological domain and the second tier of the Divine King's mythological domain. Lu Feng had also heard of the immortal and demon god before. Heavenly Lord Netherworld had entered the third tier of the mythological domain and had a lifespan of 1,000,000 years. After he had become the second tier of the Divine King's mythological domain, he had almost never fought. Even when the Divine King clashed, he had only used the immortal and demon god. Therefore, the god of immortals and demons had a terrifying reputation in the ancient records of the various races. The second form is the tool form. For example, the martial path incarnation that your father condensed is in the form of a tool. My God Slayer's sword is the martial path incarnation that I condensed. Besides me, one of the most famous peerless divine kings of the human race, the divine King Tai, is also the same. His martial path incarnation is the Tai sovereign sword. In the later stages, the martial path incarnation that is in the form of a tool can even be used as a weapon of an expert. You can imagine how terrifying it is to be able to use the martial path incarnation to clash with an expert after it has been endlessly strengthened. Xiaofeng, you should know how much a powerful weapon can increase a martial artist's strength. The Tai sovereign sword. Lu Feng not only knew about it, but he had also seen it before. In the mysterious interior of Gufang's star, in front of that terrifying crack, The three divine kings had left behind their martial path incarnations to provide the Gufang altar with power and help it suppress the crack. So, Father, the divine king of Netherworld's Netherworld monument is also a tool-form martial path incarnation? Lu Tao nodded lightly. Although the Netherworld monument doesn't look like a weapon, it is indeed a true tool-form martial path incarnation. In fact, it's even more powerful than the Tai Sovereign Sword. Upon hearing this, Lu Feng nodded lightly and didn't say anything else. When Lu Tao saw Lu Feng's reaction, he continued, "The third form is the living form. This type of martial path incarnation is equally powerful. Like a human form martial path incarnation, it can be summoned to fight alongside a martial artist in the later stages. It can even be given intelligence. However, this type of martial path incarnation is relatively rare. After all, many martial artists choose to take the human form instead of the living form." At this moment, Lu Feng recalled the scene he had seen before. As he was in front of his parents, Lu Feng didn't hesitate and asked directly, "A living form martial path incarnation? Then is the martial path incarnation of the peerless divine King Tian Tua Lynx of the human race?" Upon hearing Lu Feng mention the Tian Tua divine king, Lu Tao was slightly taken aback. The 15 peerless divine kings of the human race had been engraved eternally and could be memorized by the entire human race. However, among them, there were some who were famous and some who weren't. Among them, the human king, the first divine king, the emperor, the chaos-calming divine king, and the divine king of the netherworld were all well known to the human race. However, the Tian Tua divine king was one of the least famous divine kings among the 15 divine kings of the human race. Lu Tao didn't know where Lu Feng had found out about the existence of his martial path incarnation. However, he still nodded lightly. Indeed, the Tian Tua divine king's martial path incarnation, the Tian Tua Lynx, is a living form martial path incarnation. Although the Tian Tua divine king himself isn't very famous, his strength is extremely strong. Among the 15 peerless divine kings of the human race, the Tian Tua divine king's strength is considered average. Although his strength is only at the pinnacle of the first tier of the God-King mythological domain, he is able to hold his ground against a second-tier God-King mythological domain expert. The reason for all this is because of the Tian Tua Lynx. Chapter 213. Lu Feng sat there quietly, pondering over the matter. The three types of martial Dao avatars represented the three most powerful forces. Each of them had an incredible effect in the later stages, and Lu Feng was also slightly distressed about his choice at this moment. According to Lu Tao's opinion, it would be best for Lu Feng to choose the weapon-shaped martial Dao avatar. This was because this type of incarnation represented endless slaughter. The path that Lu Feng chose was the supreme Dao of killing. With such a martial Dao avatar, his future path would definitely be much smoother. Just as Lu Feng was about to get frustrated from thinking, an image suddenly appeared in his mind. But then, Lu Feng gently shook his head, because he didn't know if this could become real. But after this thought appeared, it kept lingering in Lu Feng's mind. No matter what, it couldn't be dispelled. Finally, Lu Feng took a deep breath. He had made up his mind. "Xiaofeng, have you already decided on your martial Dao avatar?" Lu Tao's eyes lit up when he saw Lu Feng's determined eyes. He knew that Lu Feng had already made his decision. Although he said that he wouldn't interfere with Lu Feng's choice, which parent didn't want their child to be like them? Seeing Lu Tao's anxious expression, Lu Feng smiled slightly, and a trace of emotion appeared in his eyes. He nodded fiercely. "Father, I've decided on the weapon-shaped avatar." Hearing this, Lu Tao smiled. It was an endless and proud smile. But Yan Chenwei's eyes dimmed slightly. Her martial Dao avatar was in human form and was similarly condensed from the legendary existence of the immortal demon era. But her martial Tao avatar wasn't one of those unparalleled experts, but a flower deity. In her opinion, she hoped that Lu Feng would choose the human form. But since Lu Feng had already made his choice, it wasn't good for her to say anything. Then Xiaofeng, have you decided what type of divine weapon you want? Why don't you choose the sword like your father? The sword is a weapon of slaughter. A sword-shaped martial Tao avatar will be of great help to your future path. Lu Feng gently shook his head. He had already made his decision. Father, you don't have to say any more. I've already made up my mind. Father. At this moment, Lu Tao's expression completely restrained himself. Usually, Lu Feng would call him father. But when Lu Feng made a huge decision, he would call him father. So, what's your choice? Lu Feng's expression was extremely solemn. At this moment, not only Lu Tao, but even Yan Chenwei was stunned. After a moment, both of them frowned. Lu Tao seemed to be considering everything. Finally, he sighed deeply and said, Xiaofeng, Gufang Star's Tongtian Futu is indeed mysterious. But in the past, someone had condensed it into a martial Tao avatar. But the martial Tao avatar obtained in the end was a weapon-shaped martial Tao avatar. But the power itself is really too weak. That Tongtian Futu seems to be a kind of decoration. Even the runes on it are just some carvings of the ancient civilization. So, if you condense that huge Futu, there's basically no effect. If Lu Feng didn't know anything, then after hearing Lu Tao's words, he would definitely give up. But Lu Feng wasn't. No one knew the horror of Tongtian Futu better than Lu Feng. The huge Futu on Gufang's star was indeed nothing. Because in front of the real Tongtian Futu, it was just an incomplete thing. The power of the real Tongtian Futu wasn't something that Gufang Star's huge Futu could compare with. Tongtian Futu, just the runes exposed in Lu Feng's sight were already enough to shock an era. Tongtian Futu was really too mysterious and too terrifying. In the first level, Lu Feng seemed to see the endless galaxy era. Furthermore, he had obtained 2 supreme techniques from it. Whether it was the great devil true body or the primordial scripture, they were definitely the most brilliant techniques of this era. They were the strongest techniques comparable to the 3 king scriptures like the human king scripture. Moreover, Lu Feng had an inexplicable feeling that the 2 supreme techniques seemed to have spirituality, although it was inconceivable. But thinking back to the scene when the great devil true body and the primordial scripture appeared, Lu Feng felt that he was right. However, these supreme techniques, which were enough to flicker for countless eras, seemed to be suppressed. The power of Tongtian Futu was simply inconceivable. In addition to many ancient patterns in Tongtian Futu, Lu Feng also saw a kind of engraving. It seemed to be the engraving of some supreme characters, and those existences gave Lu Feng a feeling of invincibility, the true invincibility of an era. Lu Feng understood that those existences were most likely invincible existences at the level of the Divine King. It must be known that only the Divine King could achieve an invincible will that could make people tremble from the depths of their hearts, subdue and surrender. And the Divine King's appearance was difficult to be engraved by ordinary things. Their appearance seemed to be a kind of universal taboo. Since ancient times, how many Divine King powerhouses only had their reputations spread around, but did not have any appearance? For example, the most famous human in the universe, the human king of the Lu family. His reputation could be said that even those ordinary creatures of the foreign races knew about him. But if the human king really appeared in front of people, almost no one would know that it was the human king. 4 powerhouses like the human king, even if there was nothing, it could no longer be recorded, or his deeds could be engraved. But his appearance was protected by the laws of the universe, or something like a universal taboo. But Tongtian Futu seemed to have recorded and engraved thousands of Divine King existences. How could an ordinary person understand how terrifying it was? Therefore, in Lu Feng's heart, Tong Tianfutu was the most suitable martial Dao incarnation for him. Of course, Lu Feng couldn't explain all of this to his parents, so he didn't say anything. He just looked resolutely at Lu Tao and Yan Qinwei. It wasn't until the two of them sighed slightly that he laughed heartily. Lu Feng knew that Lu Tao and Yan Qinwei had already decided not to stop him. Xiaofeng, since you've already made up your mind, then we won't stop you anymore. It's all up to you. But you have to be clear that once your martial Dao incarnation is condensed, then it will be it for the rest of your life. You must not regret it. Lu Feng nodded lightly, but also heavily. Regret? He would never regret his own choice. Moreover, regret was the privilege of the weak. I understand, Dad. After saying this, Lu Feng slowly closed his eyes. If he didn't make a decision, he would be in trouble. When Lu Feng made his decision, he had already entered his mental space and started condensing his martial Dao incarnation. Looking at everything in front of him, Lu Feng was completely stunned. What's going on? Why, I haven't come in for a year. How did this place become like this? At this moment, there were shocking changes in front of Lu Feng's eyes. The void was still the endless dark void. This was exactly the same as before. And it was the same as in his memory. The towering and endless majestic and terrifying Tong Tianfutu was still there. However, it was no longer the Tong Tianfutu of the past. What appeared at this moment was no longer the small part that he had seen all the time in the past. The peak was still hidden in the endless chaos. But outside the chaos, a lot of parts had already been exposed. 2 layers. It's already 2 layers. The first time he entered this place, he only saw the bottom level. But now it was different. The chaos that hid all the truth had gradually decreased by a lot. Therefore, more and more Tong Tianfutu appeared from the chaos. However, the changes in the entire Tong Tianfutu were not only that. Or it could be said that there was an extra layer. This was the biggest change. But in addition to this, the entire Tong Tianfutu seemed to be different. Lu Feng could clearly see that the countless runes from before were now as resplendent as the sun. The degree of brightness was almost indescribable. Majestic, terrifying, the existence of an emperor. The entire Tong Tianfutu actually gave Lu Feng such a feeling. He took a deep breath. Lu Feng did not know the reason for the changes in the Tong Tianfutu, but he knew that all of this should be closely related to him. After a slight hesitation, Lu Feng finally walked directly towards the Tong Tianfutu. Although he was also flustered, he also understood that this was his natural reaction to an unfamiliar environment. He suppressed some of the negative emotions in his heart. Lu Feng, who pulled himself together, felt his heart beating faster. In the first layer, I got the great devil true body and the primordial scripture. So, what else is in the second layer? The things obtained in the first layer were treasures that were enough to make the billions of races in the universe go crazy. Lu Feng could not imagine what else was hidden in the second layer. In the space of consciousness, Lu Feng was God. His thoughts were the will of God. Therefore, the seemingly endless journey was reached in an instant by Lu Feng's thoughts. Standing in front of the Tongtian door, Lu Feng's expression was completely calm. He still vaguely remembered the first time he came here and the scene after entering this place for the first time. At that time, starting from here, he completely changed his life. In the past, I was just an ordinary person, a waste in the eyes of a real aristocratic family. Bloodline, supremacy, these have nothing to do with me. However, ever since I walked through this door, everything changed. I got the great devil true body and the primordial scripture from inside. I received an unprecedented transformation. From then on, I was no longer an ordinary person. Now I'm here again. I don't know what will happen this time. Without hesitation, he stepped into the door. Chapter 214. In front of him was still the boundless chaos. This was exactly the same as when he had obtained the two supreme technique. However, it wasn't as if nothing had changed. In the center of the chaos, an ancient door had appeared out of nowhere. It was like a door of chaos that connected the future and the present world, connecting the other side and the next life. It was just an ordinary door, but it seemed to be a living existence. It was like a terrifying overlord that gave Lu Feng endless pressure. However, in the face of this door that seemed to be able to easily suppress even gods, Lu Feng felt a kind of intimacy that came from the depths of his heart. This was an indescribable feeling. What made Lu Feng feel even more strange was that he actually felt a kind of calling from the door. This is the second time it's calling. This was the second time he felt such a kind call. The first time was when he had just entered this space of consciousness. At that time, he felt the call of the heavenly bridge Futu. Therefore, he had entered the Futu. And now, this was the second time. Lu Feng knew that this call was asking him to enter. He didn't hesitate. The call had become even more intense. It made him have an impulse to throw caution to the wind. And Lu Feng understood that there was really a strange connection between the heavenly bridge Futu and himself. Although he didn't know why, Lu Feng was certain that the heavenly bridge Futu would never hurt him. Therefore, Lu Feng still took a step forward and walked into it. Xiaofeng, what's going on? In the outside world, Lu Tao and Yan Chunwei looked at Lu Feng in horror. They didn't understand why such a scene would occur at this moment when Lu Feng was only condensing his martial path avatar. At this moment, Lu Feng had completely changed. His body was surrounded by countless brilliant lights. However, this was not what shocked them the most. Therefore, the reason why these two great beings, who were already at the pinnacle of the universe, were shocked was that the brilliance overflowing from Lu Feng's body was not ordinary at all. This is a fragment of the laws of nature. These are all fragments of laws. But why are these things overflowing from Xiaofeng's body? The laws were something that only those who had surpassed the true God realm, those who were invincible in the heavenly God realm, could begin to come into contact with. Although laws of nature fragments were different from laws of nature, they were things that only deities could begin to come into contact with. However, at this moment, these things actually appeared in Lu Feng's body. This scene finally made Lu Tao and Yan Chunwei completely shocked. Could it be that something is wrong with Xiaofeng's body? Quickly think of something. No, we can't let anything happen to Xiaofeng. Looking at Lu Tao beside her, Yan Chunwei had already forgotten her identity. At this moment, she was just a frightened mother. Lu Tao did not speak because he had already used all of his power at this moment. What Lu Tao had comprehended was the space-time law, one of the monarch Dao laws. When used to the extreme, he could even trace back space-time and reflect reincarnation. At this moment, he was using such an unparalleled technique. Although he could not trace back Lu Feng's past. However, he could see through the essence of everything. When using all of his power, Lu Tao could even see through the Han Emperor back then. However, as time went on, Lu Tao's expression became more and more ugly. Finally, with a groan, Lu Tao's face turned pale. Seeing this scene, Yan Chunwei's expression was slightly stifled. Although she was dissatisfied with Lu Tao in many ways, Yan Chunwei also loved her husband the most. She kept attacking Lu Tao, but she really admired Lu Tao's strength. If not for this, with her identity as Queen Wei, how could she have married Lu Tao? However, Lu Tao's appearance at this moment made her feel incredulous. She even temporarily forgot everything. Who was Lu Tao? He was recognized in the universe as having the strength of the King of Massacre, an existence with the potential of the Divine King. He was so powerful that even an expert like the Virtual King had to give in. However, at this moment, just because he wanted to trace back the truth of Lu Feng, who had just stepped into the realm of martial artists, he had such a serious expression. This was really too unbelievable. After a while, Yen Chunwei, who had reacted, suddenly supported Lu Tao, whose body was slightly swaying. She hurriedly asked, "Tao, what's going on?" Looking at the anxious expression in his wife's eyes, Lu Tao smiled helplessly. There was a strange expression in his eyes. He looked at Lu Feng and was silent for a moment. Finally, under Yen Chunwei's urging, he slowly said, "I can't tell. I used the space-time laws, but I couldn't tell anything. The Xiaofeng in my eyes seemed to be a piece of chaos. There were no signs of life, no traces of karma. It was as if everything about him was hidden in the endless chaos. When I wanted to break through the chaos to take a look, I was severely injured. My soul was severely injured. His soul was severely injured." Hearing this, Yen Chunwei's eyes were filled with disbelief. Who was Lu Tao? He was an invincible existence that made billions of young geniuses in the universe tremble in fear. No one dared to compete with him. Moreover, he was of the Lu family's bloodline. He was the complete direct descendant of the Lu family. Such an existence was incomparably noble. His soul was favored by fate, and he was much, much stronger than ordinary people. Moreover, the current Lu Tao was no longer as weak as he had been in the past. He was now in the heavenly god realm. His power was comparable to the virtual king's. In other words, the strength of his soul was not weaker than the virtual king's. Otherwise, it would not be able to support such a powerful combat strength. However, such an extremely terrifying soul had been severely injured because it had spied on some of Lu Feng's secrets. Although she was worried about Lu Tao's injuries, Yen Chunwei also knew that Lu Tao would be fine as long as he recuperated. Therefore, her attention was now focused on Lu Feng again. "Tao, how is Xiaofeng? What's the matter with him?" Now, Yen Chunwei had gradually calmed down. Although she was Lu Feng's mother, she was also Queen Wei. She was a goddess who was about to step into the heavenly god realm. She, who had experienced countless storms and waves, quickly calmed down. Although he was still as anxious as before, he was no longer at a loss for what to do. Hearing Yen Chunwei's question, Lu Tao was also incomparably silent. He took a deep breath, and there was a strange kind of profoundness in his expression. "Chunwei, do you know when precept fragments usually appear?" Yen Chunwei was slightly stunned. She was now only in the true god realm. Although she had reached the peak and was only a little bit away from entering the heavenly god realm, she still had not succeeded. And precepts were something that only heavenly gods could come into contact with. Therefore, she was not clear about precepts at all. Precepts are something that only heavenly gods can come into contact with. And precept fragments, although they are just fragments, they are power that overflows from precept. However, they are really the power of precepts. Without precepts, where would precept fragments come from? In other words, the current Xiaofeng is already immersed in precepts. Yen Chunwei took a deep breath. There was a kind of unconcealable shock in her expression. Precepts were something that even she could not come into contact with. However, Lu Tao was saying that Lu Feng was already immersed in precepts at this moment. This saying was not just terrifying, it was simply heaven-defying. Incomparably heaven-defying. In that case, is Xiaofeng good or bad now? In Yen Chunwei's heart, she did not need Lu Feng to be very strong. She only needed Lu Feng to be stable, safe, and happy. This was the heart of a mother. It was the heart of every mother. It was what they hoped for the most. Even for someone like Yen Chunwei, who was almost a heavenly god, it was the same. Hearing this, Lu Tao's expression changed. He nodded gently, then shook his head. He said slowly, "Actually, I don't know either. Since ancient times, only heavenly gods have been able to comprehend and come into contact with precept. The only ones who can break this confinement are only a few. Our ancestor, the human king, started to cultivate precepts after he was close to becoming a god. heavenly venerate Netherworld, the first divine king, and the great demonic Sky Emperor, the three recognized strongest divine kings in the universe, also started to come into contact with precepts when they were in the divine spirit realm. As for me, I started to slowly come into contact with precepts when I was in the true God realm. It's just that Xiaofeng, who has just stepped into the martial warrior realm, seems to have already immersed himself in precepts. Since ancient times, no one has ever. Therefore, I can't say whether everything is good or bad. The second level. This was the second level. Looking at the empty but incomparably substantial scene in front of him, Lu Feng was a little dazed and sluggish. He did not know what these illusory things in front of him were, but he could clearly feel the terrifying fluctuations coming from them. This was a nearly invincible and terrifying strength. Just a tiny bit of it was enough to completely annihilate him and make him return to nothingness. This strength had already surpassed the strength of a divine spirit. It was born from the heavens and earth, a terrifying existence that naturally appeared. What are these things? Why do I feel so terrified? I even feel an illusion of majesty. He was now a titled emperor, but his true existence should be that of an emperor. At the same boundary, an ordinary genius simply had no chance of resisting Lu Feng. Facing Lu Feng, they would be instantly suppressed by Lu Feng's unparalleled emperor will. Unless it was a monstrous existence or someone who could make Lu Feng reveal a portion of his strength, even a true king of slaughter would not be able to force out Lu Feng's final trump card. His nobility came from the depths of his fate. He was an innate noble existence. But now Lu Feng actually felt a kind of majesty that came from the depths of his heart above those illusory things. It was a terrifying suppression. This was really inconceivable to him. Looking at the things in the distance and feeling the different wills coming from them, Lu Feng's eyes became brighter and brighter. Slowly, he actually took a step towards those things. Illusory yet real. It has the power of the origin. It seems to be the source of all the structures of the heavens and earth. It seems to be the condensation of the strongest wills. To be able to make me, an emperor, feel the majesty in my heart and feel a kind of vast might of the heavens and earth. Then, these illusory things that seem like runes should be the legendary laws. Dao Songtian had once told Lu Feng about the differences between Psyche masters and martial artists. He had also told him why there were so many surprises in the later stages. At that time, Lu Feng gradually understood what the laws were, and even what power was. However, understanding was one thing. Lu Feng had never thought that he would actually see these things. His eyes were filled with unconcealable excitement. After a moment, Lu Feng appeared in front of a nearby illusory rune. He stretched out his arm and wanted to touch it, but at this moment, a trace of hesitation appeared on Lu Feng's face. He did not know if he should touch it. After all, the existence of laws was the source of power for the gods. They were incomparably frightening and were things that had to be treated with reverence. And now, he had just reached the level of a martial artist. However, in the next moment, Lu Feng seemed to have thought of something. A strange light flashed in his eyes. If someone could see it, they would definitely discover that Lu Feng's eyes were very similar to his eyes when he was crazily bleeding and fighting against the 5 emperors. Chapter 2:15. In the eyes of parents, this was called persistence, but in the eyes of outsiders, this was called madness. When Lu Feng showed such an expression, it proved one thing. He had already decided. He had already forgotten everything and was only focused on the existence in front of him. Finally, Lu Feng's arm reached out slowly and made contact with the illusionary figures. At this moment, it was like hundreds of millions of years of eternity, as if endless time and space had evolved and changed. At this moment, Lu Feng seemed to have seen a lot. He saw the course of life and the change of era. He saw the change of time and the intertwining of fate. Lu Feng felt as if he was immersed in an endless ocean. That feeling was so comfortable that he couldn't help but moan. In his mind, countless strange things were crazily pouring in. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes gradually showed an incredible light. He could feel that the realm that he had just comprehended after the crazy battle with many sons of slaughter a day ago and had stepped into the threshold was rapidly increasing at this moment. It actually began to break through at a terrifying speed. The increase was 11 times, 12 times, 13 times, 20 times, 30 times, 40 times, 97 times, 98 times, 99 times. After a moment, Lu Feng slowly opened his eyes. However, at this moment, there was no excitement in his eyes. There was only a kind of complete shock and an expression of disbelief. How is this possible? According to the normal speed, if he wanted to increase his comprehension of the realm from 11 times to 99 times perfection, even if he fully comprehended it with the help of countless strange divine objects, it would be impossible to do so in less than half a year. But now, in just a few moments, he had actually done it. This was simply unbelievable. It could even be said to have broken all the theorems. Could this be the terror of the law? Is the law really so terrifying? The law was something incomparably mysterious to any existence. Even if one became a god, he would still be unable to come into contact with the level of the law. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't know anything about the law. The existence of psychic masters, the power of the law of criminal detention, has turned into their own eternal invincibility. They are terrifyingly powerful, and no one in the same level can compete with them. A mighty warrior can borrow the power of the nomological laws, but in the end they can integrate with the nomological laws, and after transforming into the divine king, they will return to the same destination as the psychic master, standing above the nomological laws. But, no matter if you're a psychic or a warrior, when they come into contact with the laws, they all have to start from the realm of heavenly deity or heavenly master. And right now, I'm only at the level of a warrior. Only at the level of a warrior. I haven't even become a deity yet. How could I possibly come into contact with the laws? How could it possibly give me such a terrifying comprehension? Previously, when Lu Feng came into contact with it, although it was crazy, he also understood and had an indescribable feeling. The existence of this law should not be able to harm him. It wasn't just because he felt it, but also because this law had appeared in the sky-piercing Futu. Tongtian Futu itself was incomparably mysterious and bizarre. They had endless mysterious origins and powers. However, when it appeared in Lu Feng's mind space, it gave him a brand new metamorphosis. Lu Feng knew that without the sky-piercing Futu, there wouldn't be the Emperor Lu Feng. Moreover, ever since Lu Feng had seen the sky-piercing Futu for the first time, he had an inexplicable feeling. It was a kind of intimate feeling that seemed to be connected by fate. This gave Lu Feng a sense of trust that surpassed any other feeling he had for it. It was also because of this that he dared to come into contact with the nomological runes. However, Lu Feng really hadn't expected that he could actually comprehend the laws. He could actually comprehend them. He knew that he had definitely relied on the existence of the nomological laws to be able to improve his comprehension of the realm to such an exaggerated extent in such a short period of time. If it hadn't been for the nomological laws, how could he have comprehended them so quickly and so deeply? Regardless of whether it's quality, realm, or other things that appear on the path of martial arts, they are all ultimately derived from the power of the nomological laws. What I directly comprehend is the power of the nomological laws. That's why these comprehensions can improve so terrifyingly. Phew! I really didn't expect to get such a bountiful harvest this time. The second level of the sky-piercing Futu actually has such a thing. Lu Feng's shock was indescribable as he looked at the boundless space filled with nomological runes. The first level had two unparalleled heaven-defying techniques. But on the second level, endless power of laws appeared. By relying on these, my future path of martial arts will be unprecedentedly smooth and smooth. With the two supreme techniques, the Great Demon True Body and the Origin Sutra, Lu Feng's external cultivation speed could be said to be very fast. He was confident that it wouldn't take long for him to catch up to the true supremes of the younger generation. Now, with the second level of the sky-piercing Fudu and the countless nomological laws, his comprehension would rise to a level that surpassed the limits of any imagination. Human monarch, primogenitor human monarch. Although you are the primogenitor of my bloodline, I, Lu Feng, will still surpass you, because I am the one and only Lu Feng. With the Great Demon True Body and the Origin Sutra, Lu Feng already had the qualifications to be on par with the human monarchs. The appearance of these two supreme techniques was already comparable to the terror of the human monarch bloodline, and the strange power in Shen Yuan's Sea of Consciousness allowed Lu Feng to reach an unparalleled level in the later stages. Even if he didn't have the bloodline of the human monarch, he would still have the qualifications to dominate the endless sea of stars in the later stages. He would have the qualifications to challenge the ancient almighties. And now, with these things, Lu Feng was even more confident that he could challenge the primogenitor human monarch in terms of cultivation speed. In this generation, I want to be invincible in this generation. I want to be invincible in history. My technique is the sole sovereign. Then I, Lu Feng, will reign supreme in the galaxy. Lu Feng walked out of the sky-piercing Fudu slowly from his cultivation. The realm below the realm was the realm. His current comprehension on the path of martial arts had already reached the peak of the realm. However, if he wanted to rely on the nomological laws to reach the realm, it was still impossible. This was because Lu Feng understood that these nomological laws would only allow him to cultivate faster and gain faster comprehension of the realm. However, they wouldn't be of much use to him comprehending the realm, or wait for me to comprehend the realm. Then, on the second level, I will be able to reach the peak of the realm level very quickly. This time, after I condense my martial path avatar and enter the massacre abyss to polish my own strength, I will be able to find Senior 2 Tianshan to enter the time realm to cultivate and raise my telekinesis level to the peak of the advanced telekinesis level. As long as I can successfully pass the assessment. Then, before I go to the Federal University, I must raise my comprehension to the realm level. Standing in the endless consciousness space, Lu Feng took one last look at the sky-piercing Fudu before leaving completely. This was because the next step he had to do was to condense his own martial path avatar. When they saw Lu Feng open his eyes, the two pairs of eyes that had been tense for 5 days finally showed a hint of relaxation. What Lu Feng saw were two pairs of eyes that were relieved. Without waiting for Lu Feng to say anything, Lu Tao was already standing in front of Lu Feng. He asked directly, "Xiaofeng, what did you experience before this?" Lu Feng was slightly stunned. What did he experience? He didn't understand why his father would ask such a question. But soon, Lu Feng completely understood. The second level of the sky-piercing Fudu was an endless world of laws. Moreover, these laws could be absorbed and comprehended. This kind of treasure couldn't even be described as shocking. Lu Feng could feel that the power of the laws he had just used to comprehend the realm was probably not even 1/1000th of the power he had consumed. Even if it was just a tiny bit, it allowed his comprehension of the realm to directly enter the great perfection realm from the most basic realm. One had to know that even those extremely monstrous geniuses would need at least a year or so to completely comprehend the realm, using all kinds of heavenly treasures. The cost of this was absolutely shocking. If it wasn't for those overlord races, they wouldn't be able to afford such consumption. It could be seen how terrifying of a treasure those laws contained in the sky-piercing Fuda's second level were. And him completing the comprehension process from initial stage to great perfection in this short time might be able to hide it from others. But to the celestial deity realm Lu Tao, it was completely laid bare before his eyes. What they were asking should be why he had such a horrifying speed of improvement. Musing slightly for a while, Lu Feng really did not know whether he should say it or not. This was not that he did not trust his own family. It was just that Lu Feng did not know how he should start talking. He had once chosen to head to Gufang's star in order to search for traces of the sky-piercing Fuda's existence. But in Gufang's star, he saw a scene that he would never forget for the rest of his life. 3 kings suppressing the world. The 3 great human races, peerless divine kings, existed for eternity in order to suppress an inexplicable spatial rift. All of this was the secret in Lu Feng's heart. He did not want to say it before he figured everything out. And this time was also the same. Looking at Lu Feng's slightly hesitant appearance, Lu Tao smiled gently. He knew that everyone would have their own secret. Those were all secrets in the depths of one's heart that could not be explained. Although Lu Tao felt a little uncomfortable that his child was hiding something, he still smiled understandingly. Xiaofeng, since you can't say it, then there's no need to say it. Hearing his father's words, Lu Feng felt a wave of pain in the depths of his heart. He was hesitating whether he should say it or not. Gradually, Lu Feng thought of the scenes in the past. He thought of the sacrifices his parents had made for him. He thought of how they had broken their family ties for him and dared to make enemies of anyone for him. An indescribable feeling kept emerging in the depths of his heart. Finally, a hint of determination appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. He had already made his decision. He raised his head and looked at his father and mother, who were smiling beside him. Although they tried their best to hide it, Lu Feng could still see the sadness in the depths of their eyes. Yes. Who were they? They were invincible existences, the pride of a peerless generation. However, they were also his parents. They were the people who gave him life. He could hide it from the whole world and deceive the entire universe, but there was no reason to keep it a secret from his parents. Chapter 216. Lu Feng took a deep breath and said slowly, "Father, Mother, I'm sorry. Actually, all of this is related to a secret of mine. It happened by chance, but it's my biggest secret." When they heard Lu Feng mention his parents, they knew that Lu Feng definitely had something important to say. And now, after hearing what Lu Feng said, they knew that Lu Feng's so-called secret was definitely extremely important. "Wait a minute, Xiaofeng." Lu Tao stopped Lu Feng from saying it directly. He glanced at Yan Chenwei beside him. After seeing her nod gently, Lu Tao finally tore the void apart. Lu Feng was slightly confused when he saw his parents' actions. However, he understood what Lu Tao and Yan Chenwei were going to do in the next moment. Lu Tao took out a square-shaped metal object from the void. Yan Chenwei's expression became complicated the moment she saw the object. Lu Tao smiled and explained when he saw Lu Feng's puzzled expression. "Your mother and I found this in an ancient ruin back then. It's a real ancient ruin. It's a legendary ruin from the elixir and equipment era. And this thing of mine was obtained from it." Lu Feng looked at the square-shaped metal object with a strange expression. He had heard of the elixir and equipment era. It was a great era from a long time ago. It belonged to one of the most ancient and powerful eras. Legend had it that countless eras were born after the immortal and devil era. However, many of them were annihilated in the long river of history. The only ones that could truly be passed down and remembered by the later generations were the greatest of the few Buddhas. These eras were undoubtedly the peak of the Golden Age. Over the past few years, geniuses have been rampant and experts have emerged in large numbers. The absolute strongest expert of an epoch, the epoch Overlord, was born. Legend has it that the overlords of the epoch have all reached the peak of the Divine King's domain. Therefore, the battle prowess of an epoch overlord is the battle prowess of the 33rd level of ultimate heaven. The limit of the Divine King's mythological domain was 11 times. This was the first tier of the mythological domain. As for the triple Divine King's domain, it was 33 times the limit. The existence of the Divine King, who can reach the third tier of the mythical domain, is no longer the Divine King. Their combat strength has reached the combat strength of the 33rd tier of the ultimate heaven. Thus, such existences are called overlords of eras. An epoch overlord was the epoch master of an era. It was the strongest representative of an era. It was said to be invincible and incomprehensible. It was a supreme existence that looked down on everything since ancient times. At this moment, Lu Feng suddenly thought of a few existences that he had heard of before. He looked at Lu Tao and wanted to ask something. However, Lu Tao stopped Lu Feng and said, "Xiaofeng, I know what you want to ask. Are you curious about the levels of the three supreme beings of our era, as well as the level of the ancestors of the Lu family?" Lu Feng nodded gently. The three supreme beings of the universe, the first divine king of the human race, the nether sky master of the serene blood clan, and the great demonic sky master of the sky devil clan. They are the divine king of the triple mythological domain and have reached the combat strength of the 33rd tier of the ultimate heaven. That's right. They are the overlords of the epoch. As expected, the ancestors of the three races, the divine king, were the overlords of the epoch. Looking at Lu Feng, Lu Tao continued. This time, his voice was obviously much slower, and there was even a trace of reverence. Lu Feng knew that what he was going to talk about next was the ancestor of the Lu family, the existence that was known to be invincible. Lu Feng, you should also know and have heard that the ancestor of the Lu family, the human king, is the publicly recognized strongest person in this epoch. He is a terrifying existence that is above the overlords of the triple mythological domain. Although the overlords of the triple mythological domain had already been annihilated in time and space when my ancestor roamed the universe, but his battle prowess is universally acknowledged. Perhaps with your strength you may not be qualified to know, but as a child of the Lu family, especially a child of the direct bloodline, you already have the status to know. A long time ago, when my ancestor stepped into the double mythological domain, he had a brief collision with the overlord of the ancient epoch across time and space. And the result was a tie. Lu Feng was stunned. In an instant, he thought of many things. He wanted to ask something, but he could not say anything. That's right, although the overlords of the ancient epoch have been annihilated, their imprints are imprinted. However, their imprints were eternal and indestructible. Even the great calamity of the universe couldn't make them disappear completely. And my ancestor, the human king, used his own imprint to have a shocking battle with them. In addition, when my ancestor disappeared, he was not at the legendary double mythological domain. His true realm was the overlord of the epoch. When my ancestor was at the double mythological domain, he already had the combat strength of the overlord of the epoch. When he became the divine king at the triple mythological domain, he had already broken the upper limit of the overlord of the epoch. Therefore, in the legends of later generations, his combat strength was the strongest throughout the ages. And such strength only appeared in the legends of the most primitive era, the immortal and devil era. Lu Feng was silent, extremely silent. These things were too fantastical for him. These were all things that he had never known before. Now that he heard Lu Tao talk about it, Lu Feng realized that there were so many secrets in this universe. From the immortal and devil era until now, there have been 5 great epochs. And in these 5 epochs there were the emergence of the overlord of the epoch. The first epoch was the primitive, immortal, and devil era. This epoch was the most primitive epoch, with unlimited power. It was recognized as the strongest epoch among all the epochs. After all, immortals and devils who surpassed the overlord of the epoch had appeared in this epoch. The second epoch was the epoch of the liches and devils fighting for supremacy. This epoch was the epoch of the descendants of immortals and devils. Legend has it that there were two overlords of the epoch with unparalleled combat strength. They were the two ancestors of the liches and devils. The third epoch was the epoch of magic. The main power in this epoch was not the power of immortals and devils, nor the physical strength, but magic. Now, the psychics of the human race and the psychics of the other races exist. In fact, many of their powers are the cultivation techniques passed down from the epoch of magic. The fourth epoch was the epoch of pills and artifacts. You should know the theme of this epoch just by looking at its name. In this epoch, pill refinement and artifact forging were popular. It can be said that the pills and artifacts that exist today were passed down from the fourth epoch. The fifth epoch was the epoch before our epoch, the epoch of martial arts prosperity. Legend has it that the two ancestors of martial arts were the overlords of the epoch. They traversed the universe and built this epoch into an incomparably brilliant epoch. It was the strongest epoch apart from the immortal and devil eras and liches and devils. However, it was a pity that the entire epoch was destroyed during the last great calamity of the universe. Only a trace of it was passed down. And this sixth epoch is our current technological epoch. Although we call it the technological epoch, the real power is still martial arts. Our technological sixth epoch is the most brilliant epoch apart from the immortal and devil eras. It can be said that we have the hope of reaching the peak of the immortal and devil eras. First, the divine king, heavenly lord Hades, and the great devil sky lord. These three were the overlords of the epoch. It was the only epoch apart from the immortal and devil eras that had three overlords. In addition to these three overlords, there was also an existence that surpassed the overlords of the epoch that only existed in the immortal and devil eras. That was the ancestor of my Lu family, the human king. These are the epochal history of the universe. Of course, in addition to these six great epochs, there were countless small epochs. Unfortunately, there were no overlords of the epoch in those epochs. They were instantly annihilated during the great calamity of the universe. There were almost no traces of them being passed down. For example, the ancient Buddha era was quite famous. Unfortunately, there were no overlords of the epoch. In the end, only those extreme Tao experts had heard of them in this epoch. This was the first time Lu Feng had heard of these. Therefore, he listened very seriously. Of course, these were all digressions. However, Lu Tao felt that the current Lu Feng was qualified to know. So, he took this opportunity to say it all out. After saying this, he pointed at the square metal in his hand and said slowly, "This artifact was passed down from the fourth epoch of elixirs and artifacts. After I obtained it, I sent it back to my family and asked the ancestors in my family to study it. In the end, they uncovered the function of this artifact. It doesn't have any powerful power. Its only function is to isolate all information. If you use this artifact, even if you hide on the same planet as the Divine King, they won't be able to discover you." For a moment, Lu Feng was slightly stunned. This artifact could isolate the Divine King's will. It could prevent the Divine King from detecting it. This was truly a little inconceivable. Seeing Lu Feng's expression, Lu Tao knew that Lu Feng was shocked. He smiled slowly and said, "Of course, this is the ideal situation. After all, the Divine King can see you with his eyes even if he doesn't rely on his own will. Moreover, if you want to prevent the Divine King from detecting you, you need to have a certain level of cultivation. Like me, at most, I can avoid the detection of a powerful virtual king. Therefore, this artifact can't guarantee your absolute safety." Lu Feng nodded slightly. This was enough. At a specific time, this square-shaped metal object was definitely a life-saving weapon. Alright. I'll give this to you, Xiaofeng. I didn't give it to you before because I thought you might never use it. However, it's different now. Now you have endless potential. You're a must-kill for all the major races. Therefore, having more life-saving items is a good thing for you and for us. Lu Feng didn't act pretentious and nodded gently. However, Lu Tao didn't give it to Lu Feng directly. He held the square metal artifact in his hand and suddenly injected a powerful force into it. At this moment, a kind of barrier appeared on the artifact and instantly enveloped Lu Feng completely. This is the manifestation of this artifact. Alright, Xiaofeng, you can say whatever you want now. Although I can't guarantee that the Divine King won't hear you, under the protection of your mother and I, if the Divine King detects you with his will, we'll be able to sense it immediately. I can guarantee that your secret won't be known by others. At this moment, Lu Feng had an indescribable feeling in his heart. He didn't expect that Lu Tao and Yan Qinwei had already thought of this for him. After all, they did so much just to protect his secret. This was only because they were his parent. If it were anyone else, they definitely wouldn't be so meticulous. Chapter 217. Lu Feng muttered to himself for a moment. He was thinking about what to say. Lu Tao and Yan Qinwei weren't in a hurry. They just waited quietly for Lu Feng. After a long time, Lu Feng let out a long sigh and began to speak slowly. He told them everything that had happened in his mind. Lu Feng didn't even try to hide what had happened in Gufang's star. He explained everything in one go. Lu Tao and Yan Qinwei were extremely shocked when they heard Lu Feng's story. Even they had never heard of such an incredible thing. If it hadn't been Lu Feng who had said this, they wouldn't have believed it. Finally, after an hour, Lu Feng explained everything thoroughly. At this moment, Lu Feng felt an inexplicable sense of relief. After all, some things were better shared with someone else. Silence. After Lu Feng finished speaking, there was an endless silence. And this time, it took an entire half an hour. It wasn't until Lu Tao let out a deep sigh that the silence was broken. Xiaofeng, what you said is really unbelievable. However, we believe what you said. The primordial scripture and the great demon true body are indeed extremely terrifying supreme technique. Their final peak state should be up to the Divine King, or even the Overlord of an era. It can be said that these two supreme techniques are not weaker than the three great royal scriptures. They are definitely not inferior to the Lu family's human king scripture. According to what you said, to condense these two supreme techniques, one needs the divine origin and the primordial body. With these restrictions, the possibility of others learning these techniques is cut off. Therefore, I'm afraid that these two supreme techniques are destined to be learned by you alone. Therefore, you have to make use of this unique resource. I believe that with these two supreme techniques and your human king bloodline, you will definitely be able to become a powerful being. In the future, you will even have the qualifications to challenge my ancestor, the human king. At this point, Lu Tao's eyes shone brightly. It was an excited glow. Although the human king was a supreme and inviolable existence in the eyes of the Lu family's bloodline, as well as in the eyes of the human race and billions of other races, he was a peerless genius. However, as an expert, an unparalleled monstrous genius with overflowing talent, surpassing the human king realm was the dream of every monstrous genius. Unfortunately, the human king was too terrifying. His battle achievements were unparalleled. Apart from the immortal devil era, which had almost no legends, no one in the 5 eras could compare to him. Now Lu Tao saw hope. His son, his pride, Lu Feng, had such potential. The great demon true body was enough to make up for the gap between the human king's bloodline and Lu Feng. The strange power of the Origin Sutra could even allow Lu Feng's battle prowess to surpass that of a human king of the same level. The opening of the second level of sky-piercing Fudu had already allowed Lu Feng to obtain such a shocking amount of wealth. Lu Tao believed that in the next few levels, there would be even more terrifying divine treasures that would shock the entire universe. With these things, Lu Feng could really become the #1 person in the next few eras. He might even be able to match the human king and reach the same realm as the supreme existences of the immortal devil era. When he thought of this, Lu Tao felt a burst of excitement. After a long time, this excitement slowly disappeared. He looked at Lu Feng and muttered to himself for a moment. Then, he slowly said, "Xiaofeng, as for sky-piercing Fudu, I can't tell you anything. This is because I don't know anything about it either. In the past, we all thought that Gufang Star's Fudu had a great secret. However, no one has been able to unravel this secret. Even my ancestor, the human king, was the same. Therefore, you still need to explore this point on your own. I believe that at the end of sky-piercing Fudu, there will definitely be an explanation for everything. Although this is just my feeling, I believe in it." Lu Feng nodded gently. He had the same thoughts as Lu Tao. "This time, I finally know why you want to condense sky-piercing Fudu's martial path incarnation. Indeed, it already exists in your mental space. It is so terrifying, mysterious, and mighty. Condensing it as your martial path incarnation is very suitable. I think you should have already succeeded in condensing it. Why don't you show us?" Lu Fenglai didn't have any difficulty condensing sky-piercing Fudu's martial path incarnation. After all, sky-piercing Fudu had existed in his mental space for a long time. Back then, in order to establish the god's domain and condense the primordial body, Lu Feng and sky-piercing Fudu had spent countless years together. If he wanted to condense this martial path incarnation, it would be very simple. He nodded gently. In the next moment, Lu Feng's eyes shone with an incomparably solemn light. Slowly, Lu Feng's body began to sway slightly. Lu Tao knew that this would happen when the martial path incarnation was summoned for the first time. Finally, when Lu Feng's body swayed to the greatest extent, a shadow slowly appeared behind Lu Feng. It was an extremely blurry shadow. Its overall appearance was almost the same as Gufang Star's Futu Pagoda. However, in Lu Tao's opinion, sky-piercing Futu and Futu Pagoda were not on the same level at all. In terms of overall clarity, Lu Feng's sky-piercing Futu was far inferior to Gufang Star's Futu Pagoda. However, the ancient and desolate aura lingering on it, the terrifying willpower power, was something that Gufang Star's Futu Pagoda could never catch up to. "Is this the sky-piercing Futu you were talking about?" Feeling the terrifying power coming from the martial path incarnation, Lu Tao was slightly shocked for a moment. Although the martial path incarnation had terrifying power in the later stages. However, in the early stages, especially at the beginning of its birth, it shouldn't have any power. At most, it should have a certain degree of enhancement in the early stages. The rest shouldn't have been there. However, thinking of the mystery of sky-piercing Futu, Lu Tao wasn't too shocked. After all, what Lu Feng had experienced could no longer be described as shocking. Lu Feng's expression was a little strange. Because this was the first time he summoned the martial path incarnation, and also the first time he felt the enhancement of this martial path incarnation. After becoming a martial artist, the multiplier of enhancement had been reduced by a lot. After all, the existence of martial artists was recognized by heaven and earth. They could easily mobilize the power of heaven and earth. The power of one star could exert dozens or even hundreds of times the destructive power. "Xiaofeng, what grade is your martial path incarnation?" Although the martial path incarnation could be measured through instrument. However, this was very troublesome. As for martial artists, they could clearly sense the level of their martial arts avatars. Therefore, Lu Tao directly asked Lu Feng about the grade of his martial path incarnation. Martial path incarnations were also divided into grades. Lu Feng was also clear about this point. Generally, the lowest grade of martial path incarnation was the existence of the 4th grade, and the peak grade was the 10th grade. For the 4th grade martial path incarnation, the limit of enhancement was 4 times. This meant that no matter what realm you were in, the limit of enhancement was only 4 times. The other grades corresponded to the multiplier of enhancement. However, the 10th grade martial path incarnation was different. Because the 10th grade martial path incarnation's maximum enhancement was 11 times. And the 10th grade martial path incarnation was also the legendary sovereign incarnation. He quietly felt it for a while. A strange expression suddenly appeared on Lu Feng's face. Seeing this scene, whether it was Lu Tao or Yan Chunwei, they were even more anxious. Lu Feng slowly took a breath, and even his tone was very strange. He said slowly, "Dad, my martial path incarnation is the 7th grade." Hearing this, Lu Tao was stunned. A 7th grade martial path incarnation was already a high-level martial path incarnation in the universe, and those who had such a martial path incarnation were almost all peak geniuses or even demon-level existences. However, this 7th grade martial path incarnation should not be for Lu Fenglai. It was not too high but too low. The Lu family's bloodline, especially the direct descendants of the Lu family's bloodline, after awakening, almost all of their martial path incarnations were above the 7th grade. And those who were overflowing with talent had even reached the 8th grade or even the 9th grade. Lu Tao's martial path incarnation, the God-slaying sword, was a 9th grade martial path incarnation. It was the most powerful and peak martial path incarnation besides the sovereign incarnation. As for Lu Feng, as the first person in the history of the Lu family's bloodline, even if his martial path incarnation was not the legendary sovereign incarnation, it should not be weaker than his own 9th grade martial path incarnation. But why was he only a 7th grade? This was not right, this should not be right. Lu Tao was slightly anxious. A martial path incarnation was extremely useful to a martialist. It even surpassed the existence of the physical body and cultivation technique. Lu Feng could rely on the blessings of a 7th grade martial path incarnation to be invincible in this era and even have the chance to reach the level of an epic overlord. However, it was still impossible for him to defeat a human king and reach the legendary realm of the immortal demon era. Just a moment ago, Lu Tao had seen the possibility of Lu Feng surpassing the human king. But now, the appearance of Lu Feng's martial path incarnation made Lu Tao fall into the abyss. How was this possible? Lu Tao's expression was extremely ugly, and so was Yan Chunwei. However, they did not notice Lu Feng's extremely strange expression at the moment. The atmosphere was extremely silent for a moment. This time, the person who broke the silence was Lu Feng. "Dad, although my martial path incarnation is a 7th grade martial path incarnation, it is very strange." Hearing this, Lu Tao frowned slightly, and there was a trace of doubt on his face. Martial path incarnation was still doubtful. Lu Feng continued, "I can sense that the moment my martial Dao avatar descended, the martial Dao avatar appeared. The degree of my enhancement increased by 3 times. 3 times? 3 times? It was 3 times. At this moment, Lu Tao and Yan Chunwei both revealed a confused and shocked expression. Once a martial path incarnation was condensed, it would have doubled the enhancement. Of course, this was not absolute. Apart from this, there was another type of martial path incarnation that had double the enhancement at the beginning of its condensation, and this type of martial path incarnation was called Monarch Path Law. Only a 10th grade Monarch Path Law could do this. Martial path incarnation, no matter what grade it is born with double the enhancement. and Monarch Path incarnation is twice the enhancement. In the following days, it will need the assistance of countless heavenly treasures to finally grow to the limit. Lu Tao, as the most important monster of the Lu family's generation, used countless heavenly treasures to finally condense his martial path incarnation to the 9th grade after becoming a divine god, which was the peak of his martial path incarnation. If it was an ordinary existence, there would not be such a huge supply of resources at all. But I also slowly cultivated from double the enhancement. There has never been a martial path incarnation that had triple the enhancement when it appeared. What is going on with all this? Could it be that this is also related to the incomparably mysterious Tongtian Futu in your mental space, Xiaofeng? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.